What did someone do to automatically qualify as the dumbest person you've ever met? An old coworker named James. We worked at McDonald's and we were both 16. One time, while mopping the lobby, he, for some unknown reason, decided to chase a number of customers around with the mop, yelling, "I'm gonna get ya!" He was fired on the spot. My brother and I were in the kitchen one day as teenagers. My brother was filling the sink to wash dishes. When the sink was nearly full, he went to turn the tap off, but it wouldn't budge, so the water kept flowing. I tried turning it too, but with no success. This is when the panic set in. The level of the water was rising fast, and we didn't want to flood the kitchen. He took big saucepans out of the press to fill with water to keep things from overflowing, while I was in a frantic scramble under the sink to try and find the mains to turn it off there. I couldn't find it. Now, really panicking, I took over the pot-filling duty and my brother went off to look for my dad as quick as he could. Dad came running in with my brother while we were shouting at him about looking for the mains. Dad just came over to the sink and pulled the plug out of the hole, letting all of the water down the drain. Haha. I had a boss named Tammy. Frick Tammy. One night, we were all working late doing stocktake, and we were discussing the impending lunar eclipse. Someone asked what happens during an eclipse. Tammy grandly explained that the eclipse would occur when America went in front of the moon, blocking our, Australia's, view of it. Like she literally thought the Earth stretched itself into a U-bend or a neck pillow shape, and half of it stayed in our normal orbit and the other half stretched itself over to casually block the moon for the rest of the Earth. Like what the hell? My roommate for the last 3 years once said that if solar technology keeps advancing at the rate it is, we'll absorb all of the energy made by the sun and fix global warming. Not 5 minutes later, after attempting to inform this poor fellow about how the sun's energy output is not determined by what the energy eventually interacts with, he states that wind farms are worse because they cause tropical storms. I mean, I hope he's just an epic troll. I just don't know. Had a guy in a third-year undergrad developmental psych course raise his hand in a full lecture hall and ask the professor, "Hey prof, do infants diagnosed with SIDS get asthma later in life? Like, are they more likely to get asthma?" SIDS stands for Sudden Infant Death Syndrome. He just kept pursuing the question. The professor didn't understand how she could answer it. She thought there was some kind of logic in it that she wasn't seeing. Finally, some girl took the initiative to shout across the room, "No, they're not more likely to get asthma, they're dead. They've died suddenly and will thus not be at risk of developing asthma." Great day. He always sat in front of me and I'd see him writing just absolutely horrible poetry and song lyrics. Look, as mean-spirited of me as it is, I'm willing to bet that reading that man's poetry would be one of the funniest damn things you could get your hands on. Idiots who take themselves way too seriously and think they're really smart are always the best source of comedy gold, until they get elected president. I am half Korean going to high school in the Midwest during the 1992 LA riots. My typing teacher pulled me into the hallway and asked if I had an uncle or something that I can call into LA to make the riots stop. She said she knew that we're all close and we all have stores and whatnot, therefore I must have a connection there. I was like, "Lady, even if I did have an uncle I could call, do you think he's Batman or something?" Oh boy, my biggest argument with this person was over whether the correct phrase was egg yolk or egg oak. My high school classmate, whose name is Nick, we were in chemistry doing a lab practical, which required the use of a bulb pipette, a glass pipette with a removable bulb that you can squeeze. Nick didn't know how to use the pipette, so he put it to his mouth to suck up the sulfuric acid. It got about 3/4 of the way up before our teacher screamed, "Nick! Stop that right now!" Why do the crossings beep? It's for blind people. But blind people can't drive. Back when I was in middle school, I was playing Guitar Hero with the neighbor, and he asks, "Hey man, why does the yellow button have a bump on it?" And for whatever reason, without missing a beat, I said, "Oh, it's so that blind people can play and they know where to put their fingers." We both accepted this as the obvious answer, and my brother was sitting on the couch watching, and he was like, "Are you two frickin' retarded? How would a blind person play this game? Think about it for a second." I felt pretty stupid after that. Oh, my cousin. All through public school, she was a snob who looked down on everyone. She was super stylish, but struggled academically. We graduated in 2014. We both went to colleges, not the same ones, She got a job at a bar and stayed out late drinking. Her boyfriend told her that she didn't need to complete college, so she just stopped showing up. Didn't drop, just stopped showing up. Completely flunked out. So here comes the mega stupidity. Our families live hours away from her college at the time. Her family wants her to move back home. My cousin's mum notices a pile of clothes in the corner. The mum said, "What is that, your laundry? Pack it up and we'll wash it when we get home later." The cousin, I kid you not, says, "You can wash those?" Turns out she had been throwing away clothes instead of washing them. She claimed she didn't know she could, yet she washed her undergarments and bras without a hitch. She's now at home with her family and has started doing more chores to show an increase in responsibility. She still tries to throw clothes away, citing that she didn't know they could be washed and reused. It makes me wonder what she thought all those years before college, before she left home. She wore the same outfits repeatedly. She had to have known they could be washed. When I was in the Navy, there was a cook on my ship. He once served rare chicken. I genuinely couldn't tell whether he was trying to cover up his limitless incompetence or if he genuinely believed that rare poultry is a thing. He was dumb enough to believe it. Another time, he was supposed to make sugar cookies, several hundred of them for the whole crew. He didn't bother to read the label on the container he opened, and apparently he didn't taste the batter at any point, and he actually made salt cookies. He used up all the remaining salt in the pantry, and we had unseasoned food for the remaining several weeks of the mission, during which time the captain assigned someone to be the cook's bodyguard. A girl my dad dated for a while. Even while dating her, my dad would say she was dumber than a bag of rocks. One day, she sat down to watch a movie with my dad. The movie was all about this guy and his twin brother. She sits and watches the whole thing, no interruptions. At the end, she turns and asks, "So, were there two of him?" Would explain why she always had the TV turned to a music channel. Apparently, she just couldn't follow normal TV or movies. There was a, troubled kid that I went to high school with. He struggled with school, but had friends. However, he was starting to do substances and go down a bad path. He decided to photocopy the front and back side of a $20 bill, cut it out of normal paper, and glue the two halves with Elmer's glue. What's even more sad is that to test his new theory, he went to the gas station, bought some gum, and it actually worked. So in his mind, it must have meant that it was a foolproof plan. So he tried to go and deposit the glued-up money at an actual bank. He was obviously found out and arrested. I don't know where he is now, but I'm assuming he's making similar life choices. I had a next-door neighbor who robbed a Howard Johnson's at the top of our street at weapon point, wearing a ski mask. He took the money, then took off the mask and was walking home, 2 blocks down the street from the bank, when the cops pulled him over and found the mask, weapon, and the money. He was wasted and asked them, "Would it help if I said I'm sorry?" Got a couple of years in Rikers Island. Came out, broke into a local apartment house, stole some money and jewelry, got stuck out in a fire escape when the ladder wouldn't go down, and he'd closed the window behind him. Got a couple more years. That's 2 stories, I guess. There's a few more, but you get the picture. He did leave me a box of cassettes when he went up one time, among them the Allman Brothers live at the Fillmore. I became a lifelong fan, so thank you, unnamed next-door failed robber. He was actually a pretty nice guy in person, and like a young Ray Liotta handsome, just dumb as a brick. I know a guy that smokes a lot of green herb and is fairly overweight. He had been trying to find work, but was having trouble finding a job since everything he was interested in was substance tested. He told my boyfriend that he had a plan that might help him pass a substance test. Since green herb supposedly gets stored in your fat cells, he proposed that he should just eat even more than he normally does so that he could gain weight. That way, the fat that he gained would replace the dank fat. Boom. Problem solved. Well, I don't think he was successful, but at least he was probably happy. There are worse lives than smoking green herb and eating junk food. It's not a great long-term lifestyle, though. She ashamedly told us, her co-workers, how she had dry-humped her boyfriend and thought she was pregnant. They were wearing clothes. She wasn't pregnant. She also thought that the Great Depression was in the 60s, along with the end of World War II. The 60s, folks. She's a nurse now. Don't know if it's the stupidest, but it's pretty damn stupid. We were on a drive through an animal park. We saw an animal. She asks, "What kind of meat would that one be?" And someone replies, "Oh, it'd probably taste similar to beef, I imagine." A few minutes later, we see a different animal. She asks, "And what about that one? Would it be like a fillet or a T-bone or something?" And that's when I realized this woman thinks that different cuts of meat come from different animals. Once at a restaurant in New Orleans, my friend ordered macaroni and cheese. At the table with about 15 other people, he says out loud, "How did macaroni and cheese become a thing?" To which I replied, "What do you mean?" He says, "I mean, it's so redundant, you know?" I say, "What? How is macaroni and cheese redundant?" And he says, "Well, think about it. You've got cheese and then you have pasta, which is made of cheese." He thought all pasta was made out of cheese. My freshman year roommate dropped a class because he wanted to play his PlayStation more. It put him below the minimum credit threshold for his scholarships and his parents owed $40,000. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My mother rolled down the car window to clean it, from inside the car, right after the car wash had started. I worked on a hay press for about a month. Most guys had a high school education. One particular guy was telling me about a girl he was talking to on Tinder or one of the many dating and chat apps. He said that she was in New York and he wanted to go visit her. I told him that's pretty cool, and New York will be quite the change from our little town. He then hesitated and asked me how close New York was. We were in Washington State. He had no idea New York was over 2,000 miles away. When I was a teenager, my friend's older brother was one of the dumbest mother effers I'd ever encountered. We once witnessed him trying to see the inside of a motorcycle gas tank using a Bic lighter. He assured me a lighter flame wasn't hot enough to ignite gasoline. On another occasion, we got into a debate concerning the power of an atomic bomb. He was dead set that you could only take out like 2 houses maximum. This man went on to have multiple arrests before I moved away, and fathered 3 children with 2 women. We all lived in a trailer court as well. I'm not saying it's a prerequisite for idiocy, but some of us get out and some do not. A guy I went to high school with was at a party and asked the homeowner if he could have her tattoo kit. She obviously said no. He left and came back an hour later with a ski mask on, demanding the tattoo kit. He was arrested the next day. You can't make up that kind of stupidity. I once had a property manager, the person who was in charge of the rental I lived in, since the homeowners lived out of state. This manager did a bunch of obnoxious things. My husband and I thought she was greedy and maybe getting money for herself and hiding it from the homeowners for repairs or something like that because of the shady-seeming things she'd do when we had repairs. Then we mentioned something about gardening. She said, "You know, I've always wanted to try growing tomatoes and just watering them with salt water. That way, the tomatoes would already be salted when you ate them." Huge reminder to never attribute to malice what is just pure old-fashioned being dumb as a rock. Knew a guy in high school who I'm 99% sure only passed because he cheated like crazy and got tons of people to do his work for him. In grade 11, he was taking some kind of politics course and was writing some kind of essay on American politics. We're from Canada. I agreed to edit his essay, and it was the most insane thing I've ever had to edit. There were multiple sentences that I couldn't understand until I asked him directly. He ended his essay with the phrase, "just like Jesus would have wanted." I don't think he was Christian, and he spelled Condoleezza Rice as Conga-Lisa Rice. My 24-year-old cousin. She legitimately thought that my sister being a vegetarian meant that she couldn't eat animal crackers. If your cousin were 4 instead of 24, this would be pretty charming. A guy I worked with named Buddy bought a huge Snap-on roll-away toolbox for over $3,000 on credit. 2 days later, he sold it to a coworker for $1.5 because he had some overdue bills and had to pay them. Needless to say, he never paid Snap-on for the toolbox. He was off into the winds after he was fired for starting his 4th fistfight at work. One of the guys I worked with told the Snap-on salesman where Buddy's new job was, and last I heard they were now garnishing his wages. The guy was a nutcase though. He had a very thin skin and the slightest thing would set him off. He'd go absolutely nuts when he was set off. He yelled at the security guard and threatened to have him fired because he didn't like his tone. He almost got fired 3 times for fighting, but he was able to win the department manager over until the 4th time. Oh, and one time he was told to put caution tape across a malfunctioning gate and he said, "I don't know how." This one lady at Atlanta's Beer, Bourbon and Barbecue Festival who clearly didn't know where she was. I'm getting started on this rack of ribs, quietly minding my own business with a glass of beer, when from the group in front of me this lady comes up to me and tells me how she can't stand the smell of meat, roasted or smoked, and tells me to get away from there. This despite the fact that the event's name has barbecue in it and she had to pay $40 to get in. After she left, I had a good chuckle and facepalm with another lady at the table, but my god, I've never seen something more stupid in my life. My friend's father robbed a bank in a small town in Indiana where he lived. This was in the late 70s or early 80s. He spent 10 years in prison for the crime. The same day he was released from prison, he robbed the same bank again. He was caught and back to prison he went. He did not learn in those 10 years not to rob any banks or anything of that matter. My friend behaved like this is what every father does and didn't seem shocked over it. I mean, maybe he just couldn't do life outside at that point? The whole same day thing is what makes me think that at least. There is no way that anyone would think that robbing a bank without scoping it out first was a good idea. Or maybe he was betting on them, never thinking he'd be stupid enough to immediately do it again? I wonder if the same slightly older clerk got the déjà vu fright of a lifetime. Guy stole a bike, cop stopped him and asked where he got it, and he said he stole it. I once called an Uber driver. When he arrived, he immediately asked me, "Are you going to X location?" I said, "No." He responded, "Great, because I'm not going to take you there." "Fine," I said. So the journey got underway, and I was curious as to what he would have done if I'd said yes, that I had wanted to go to that location. So I asked him, "Hey, what would you have done if I said that I did want to go to that place?" And he responded, "Look man, I'm not going to frickin' take you to that place, okay? I told you already." I was a bit befuddled, but I tried again. No, I don't want to go there. In fact, you already know where I want to go. It's on your destination map. I'm just curious, what if I did want to go there? Would you have refused me the trip? Would you have driven off? And he just said, "Look man, I can't change the trip now. And anyway, I told you I refuse to go there. You've got to understand that I'm busy." We spent nearly 15 minutes with variations of this back and forth. He was a fluent English speaker, by the way. By the end of it, I was 100% convinced that he couldn't understand the syntax of a hypothetical. He literally couldn't understand the question, if X situation, which is not the case, then what action would you take? I wasn't even mad, just astonished. How had he navigated through life thus far? What were his financial decisions like? I really wanted to follow him home and make a reality TV show about him or something. This guy in my aircraft technician class, I'll call him Jim. The module at the time was about electrical power. We were having a review one Friday before the exam started. Earlier that week, we had covered the batteries used on the aircraft, what types, and how they were constructed. Trainer turns to Jim and asks him about the different types, expecting him to say lead acid, lithium ion, and so on and so forth. Nope, Jim thinks for a moment and says AA, AAA, C. And when we got to the hangar for work experience, the same trainer had lost all faith in Jim. We were all assigned jobs in the morning. Me and another guy on wings, couple more on landing gear, all down through the group. Then he gets to Jim, placed an A4 sheet of paper on the ground and told Jim to stand on it so it didn't blow away. We all laughed, Jim included. The trainer was joking, right? He wasn't joking. Jim stood there all day. A girl from elementary school believed that outer space isn't real, that Benjamin Franklin invented the time machine, and she was unaware of hammers. A guy in my high school who was convinced that the Dutch had sore throats at night from their accent and language. I'm Australian and I was living in the USA while pregnant. My sister-in-law asked which accent the baby would be born with. The girl I used to work with before she got fired. One day she'd come to work with a broken arm and claimed her boyfriend pushed her during a fight and she had fallen. We were all really concerned for her until she came back a week later saying she had shanked him in the hand during a fight to get back at him for breaking her arm. Then a few weeks later she told everyone she was secretly trying to get pregnant because if she got pregnant, her unemployed boyfriend would have to get a job and help pay the rent. She got pregnant and her boyfriend immediately dumped her. Oh my god, so many twists. But not in her fallopian tubes, unfortunately. An old co-worker of mine, he was helping me move and while we were carrying the couch, he dropped it. Thinking he was hurt, I asked if he was okay, and with the most serious and frightening look in his eyes, he said, pointing, "Look, it's the moon and it's daytime." He was 25 at the time. My sister, who carved a symbol of the Third Reich on her own arm, it wasn't even symmetrical. Sieg Fail. There was this guy at my high school who wasn't too bright and was mostly harmless, but about halfway through he decided he was going to be a thug. One day he goes into a class of first years when the teacher wasn't there and robs all of their electronics, cash and valuables at knife point without covering his face, and before he left he gave them his real name, saying, "And you'd better not tell them that it was me, Jim Conrad, that stole all your stuff." He then proceeded to leave school grounds with all of the stuff, but then decides against stashing it off campus, so he came back with all of the stolen stuff in his backpack and went back to spy on the class with his backpack full of loot while the police officers were taking their statements so that he could make sure that the other kids weren't ratting him out. The kids all rat him out, and when he hears his name, he steps into the class, proclaiming he'd gut every single last one of them if they didn't take back saying that he did it. With the police officers still in the class and all of his loot still in his pack. He was expelled and arrested, and when word got out to our year group, everyone just face-palmed. I don't know why he's so stupid, but it wasn't an isolated act of idiocy. It was quite well known by everyone in our year group how dumb he was. In fact, he didn't even qualify for admission, but his family called in a ton of favors to get him in on recommendation. One night during high school, my friend and I got invited to a party. I didn't drive back then, so my friend picked me up. All went well on our way to the party. On the way back, however, he got pulled over. As we were pulling to the side of the road, I told him I was going to pretend to be sleeping, since I was the passenger. Anyway, I hear the cop get out of his cop car, walk towards our car, stop at the window, and not say anything. I can feel the brightness of his flashlight, but I don't hear him or my friend say anything. After what seemed like an eternity, I decide to open my eyes to see what's going on. And that's when I see my friend, the guy who's driving, pretending like he's sleeping as well. What's the best example of having FU money that you've seen? Kerry Packer. He frequented a particular casino quite often. One night after a good run, he wanted to tip the dealer. She declined as per casino policy, so he asked to see her supervisor, who affirmed that it was against company policy for employees to accept tips from clientele. He demanded that they fire her or he'd never come back. They obliged, and then he said, "Well, now she's not an employee, so I can tip her," and gave her a ridiculous sum of money. The supervisor obliged. Kerry then said, "Now hire her back again or I'll never come back to your casino." She got her job back and pocketed the tip. Not a case of genuine FU money, but a lesser situation that sticks out in my mind to this day. It happens to a close friend quite some time ago. He and his wife were looking for a decent home in a particular area, something to grow into and raise a family. They didn't ever find what they were looking for, so they bought a nice-sized parcel of rural land after doing a frickin' crap ton of homework and built a home on it. They were self-made. They paid cash for it all, owned it lock, stock and barrel. They built it up over the years, so it wasn't all at once. They were also a bit eclectic and liked to work on different art projects. Eventually, they had a couple of workshop garages, they liked to paint the place different contrasting colors, had a garden out front, among other stuff. Not ugly, but it wouldn't be considered the norm. It was pretty out of the way at the time, so it wasn't a big deal. Practically no neighbors, very minimal zoning and permit laws. That's one of the reasons they chose that land plot in the first place. So fast forward some odd 25 years, the entire area was becoming developed. Their kids are grown up and moved out. A massive housing development now circles their property like a big old lopsided U-shape, nearly surrounding it. And then they start getting letters from the development owners as well as their HOA representatives and lawyers. They get approached by these goons via official-looking letters, saying essentially, "In this jurisdiction, we can compel your bank, who holds the mortgage to the property, to force you to join the HOA and abide by our guidelines. It's the same laws that compel homeowners to carry homeowners insurance for the duration of the mortgage." Well, these two did their research, and apparently in many places, you might have bought the property without an HOA, but they can compel you to join one if ever offered. Since HOAs increase property prices, that protects the bank investment and they normally comply. So my friend just said, "Well, go ahead, compel away, idiots." Remember, they bought this place in cash all those years ago. No mortgage involved. So the development and HOA couldn't do a damn thing. Best use of FU money that I've seen. Last I spoke with them, they were hiring a lawyer to ensure that if the property changes hands, a no HOA exclusion is put into the deed. That way, their kids can inherit it or sell it without any HOA nonsense. We stand someone sticking it to an HOA here on the channel. If you can make your association's council rue your name, you're doing a great job. I used to work with companies that built super yachts. It happened several times that the interior of a vessel that had been finished in $500,000 worth of marble, after which the owner walks in, decides he doesn't like the color in hindsight, and requests it all to be removed again. The CEO of my company is actually a super solid guy. He hates one of our competitors so much that he bought a billboard right outside the competitor's office and kept our ad up until they changed locations. Billionaire Howard Hughes reserved the top 2 floors of the Desert Inn in Las Vegas for 10 days, and when his 10 days were up and the hotel asked him to check out, he wasn't ready to leave, so he bought the hotel and stayed there for 4 more years. I'm an employment and contract attorney. In my younger days, I was a corp counsel for a large hospital. We were in the midst of a fundraising campaign and were a few million from our goal. Got a call from a young, wealthy guy. He offered to cover the remainder plus an extra 10% with 2 stipulations. He'd used to work at the hospital when he was younger and made it big with a medical device company that he started. So he wanted a voting member board seat, and he wanted to fire this vice president who was his supervisor when he worked there and had made his life miserable. This supervisor had been the reason he quit and eventually went into business himself. I took it to the board and CEO. They agreed to the board seat. I couldn't advise they allow the firing for liability purposes. However, the CEO decided to reorganize certain departments, and coincidentally, this VP's position was eliminated. The new board member chaired the committee that made the call on the reorganization and informed the VP of the changes. That was the biggest FU long-time grudge I ever saw. My uncle brought a $900,000 small shop back in 2012, cash, just so it wasn't torn down because he liked to go there as a kid. Literally just an abandoned small store in downtown Evansville. I have no clue what the store is, all I know is it's by a casino and it was bought at the end of 2012. I don't even know if he owns it still. He could have flipped it or demoed it down. He runs multiple businesses in Evansville, Indianapolis, Louisville, Frankfort, and Nashville. My friend knows a guy that flew his private jet from London to France for lunch. When he finished lunch, his jet was having some maintenance issues. Rather than waiting the 2 or 3 hours for them to figure it out, he approached a less rich private jet owner and offered them a big enough check for it to be worth their inconvenience to sell him their jet on the spot. I worked at a high-end eco-resort some time ago. We spent weeks preparing for some guest who had booked up half the resort for him and his family. We were doing a bunch of renovations and changes in the cabins and rooms because the guy was so picky. But he was spending a lot, so whatever. We even rebuilt the motor on another boat and outfitted it for downrigging because they needed 3 fishing boats. The guy shows up for his reservation, and the first thing he does is start cussing out and belittling the girl at the front desk. The owner walked in to see what his problem was, and the guy proceeded to crap on the front desk girl to him. So the owner just said, "I'm terribly sorry you feel that way. We'll give you a full return on your deposit so you can find somewhere better to stay." The guy's face goes white and he starts apologizing and pleading with him, but the owner didn't care. The guy had to go out to the parking lot and explain to his entire family how his garbage temper messed up their 1-week vacation and they'd have to find somewhere else to stay. The owner couldn't give a damn how much extra money he had spent. He wasn't taking that crap, and more importantly, he wasn't going to let the staff take that crap either. He wasn't my favorite boss, but that's something I respect. You know, this may well be a case of frick you, money, rather than having frick you money. But then again, if you own a resort, you're probably doing just fine financially. Good on that guy for sticking up for his staff. It's a shame not everyone can afford to do that. Furicchio Lamborghini. Back in the days, he got rich building tractors. He bought himself a Ferrari because he's Italian, and it was the thing you did when you became successful. Unfortunately, sports car clutches back then were crap and failed often. He went to Ferrari himself and said he could fix the problem, and was told to go back to his tractors because he knew nothing about high-performance cars. The wiki says he made cars to compete with Ferrari and others, but in reality, he did it to spite Ferrari. Starting a car factory to spite someone is an epic level of FU. Somewhat related, there's also the development of Ford GT. At one point, Ford was in talks to buy Ferrari, but Ferrari had no intention of selling to Ford, instead using the talks with Ford to drive up the price when he sold to Fiat. But the deal ensured that Enzo Ferrari would maintain control of Ferrari's racing division. Out of pure spite, Ford spent an absurd amount of money to develop Ford GT40 to end Ferrari's winning streak at the 24-hour Le Mans. Basically, a lot of development in motorsport and sports cars has been done purely to give Enzo Ferrari the middle finger. The Abu Dhabi royal family bankrolling and slapping their name, Khalifa, on the world's tallest building. because Dubai ran out of money to complete it. My friend's mother-in-law has a wonderful home on Cape Cod. It's not one of the huge McMansion eyesores that started showing up in nearby towns in the 1980s. It's just a very comfortable, well-designed, 3-bed, 2-bath house on the hillside with lots of beautiful hand-hewn woodwork and an incredible view of the coast, just a couple of streets downhill. The house was built in the mid-1950s, and while there aren't many strict legal boundaries regarding what can and can't be built or renovated, expanded or demolished, the folks in this community have been happily coexisting so well for the past 75 years that you can count the number of incidents on one hand, and everyone knows who tried to do what with their house on their land. The neighbor who lived one street downhill, between my pal's mother-in-law and the coast, sadly passed away during the pandemic, and because his children had moved away, the property went to market and was immediately snatched up well over asking price by some Boston-based tech bro. Within a month, he'd started demolishing the retaining walls and driveway to allow access for the general contractor he had hired to tear down the existing house, which had been meticulously cared for and looked right at home in the neighborhood, so that he could raise a new concrete and glass monstrosity that would have completely severed the line of sight to the coast for at least 4 houses located uphill. I wasn't aware of the means available to my buddy's mother-in-law, but after a few neighbors introduced themselves to this new arrival to the area and expressed their concerns, she cut him a check for 5% above what he paid for the house. No loans, no remortgage on her existing home, no payment plan, she just bought it outright for more than I'll earn in the next 25 years, even if I'm lucky. The downhill house is now rented well below market value to a lovely family with 2 kids. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I met a guy in rehab who was so rich that after one session ended, he flew the rest of us across state lines on a jet he just had ready to go, and took us skydiving and got us back home before our sober living curfew. When we landed at that other airport, the instructors already knew and had our parachutes and gear laying out ready to get everyone prepared, like he'd just told them, "Yo, me and 10 friends are gonna go skydive in a few hours, be ready for us." He did all of this on a whim too that day. Some of the people totally had warrants and weren't supposed to travel at all, especially across state lines, so the house manager wasn't happy. The guy was a real homie. Some of the other people totally tried to abuse his generosity, but I genuinely just liked that guy. He tried to buy me dinner, but I refused to not pay my half because he was just so frickin' generous and caring that I felt bad. Sad that he was going through crap because he was so nice and generous with his money. I went to his giant, expensive Orange County mansion with him too, and he made me the best steak I've ever had in my life. I hope he's doing well. Growing up, our neighbor was incredibly wealthy, probably in the low 9 figures, and owned a tremendous amount of land and could probably influence the price of beef with the amount of cattle he had. And oil, of course. He was in his mid-80s, health was deteriorating, so his kids showed up while he was recovering from surgery and explained to him that they didn't want him driving anymore and took his truck. Soon as they left, he called a local dealership and had a brand new truck dropped off an hour later. The kids came back over the next day and he just told them he had decided he wanted to keep driving and was fine buying another new truck every day if he had to. "Listen here, you little crap bags. If I want to crash my massive vehicle on the highway and cause a 20-car pileup, I'm gonna do it, gosh darn it!" I'm stumped and don't know how you deal with that issue. Well, at least that's an issue us regular paws don't have to deal with when our parents get old. Notoriously, Mark Cuban literally getting fined for saying the F word on a broadcast and finding out that the fine goes to charity and saying it again. Kerry Packer playing poker in Las Vegas when a Texan approached his table and was being a nuisance. The Texan was asked to calm down and responded with, "Don't you know who I am? I'm worth 100 million, you know?" Packer apparently interjected with, "I'll flip you for it." Kerry Packer was worth 4 billion on his death. His life story is a fascinating tale. There's a story that him and a couple of companions were driving through England in the mid-late evening and stopped at a pub for dinner. They got told, "No, the chef's gone home, kitchen's closed," so they went to the next pub and the owner said, "Chef's gone home, but I can run up some toasted sandwiches if you like," and they agreed. Story goes that Kerry Packer left a 10 grand tip, but said the owner had to go and tell the owner of the other pub about it. I know somebody who tried to build a giant garage in their backyard to conduct their business out of. The neighbor complained to the town planning board and managed to block construction. He bought the empty land next to the neighbor's house and donated it to Habitat for Humanity so that they'd build a house there just to annoy that neighbor. He then managed to get some tweaked plans through the planning board for his giant garage to hold his sailboat, the sailboat that didn't exist. My uncle made a bunch of money in investment banking. Seemingly out of the blue, he decided to buy a chain of shops he was fired from for catching his manager having an affair with another employee. He bought the shop with a partner. The shop owner and the managers only ever saw the other partner. He said he made it a point of the deal to keep the personnel in place after the sale. First day after taking ownership, he walked in and fired the manager that fired him, then gave everyone else raises and made sure the ex-employee heard about it. Well, it's not like it was Bezos money or anything, but my grandmother sold her condo and bought a house down the street because the condo association wouldn't let her paint her mailbox the color she wanted. My dad witnessed a coworker win the lotto, walk straight into the boss's office, scream, "F you, you C-word" at the top of his voice and walk out. This was over 40 years ago, and he never saw that guy again. 50 Cent buying the first 2 rows of Ja Rule concert so they'd be empty. That guy's an epic troll. A lady with a private jet was told there was nowhere at the local airport she could leave it, so she brought a regional airline, Viking Air. A family friend of ours who owns a very successful national company. His wife's Jaguar, a sports coupe type, was stolen out of their driveway. He noticed at about 6 a.m. when he got up for work. He called the Jaguar dealer principal, on a first-name basis, mobile number, and had a new replacement car there by lunchtime in exactly the same color and trims. His wife apparently didn't notice until about 4 days later when the police turned up with what was left of her Jaguar. Good times. Recently found out that Jeff Bezos was sitting in his living room and randomly had the idea to find the Apollo 11 engines from the bottom of the Atlantic. He bought all of the equipment, assembled a team, and just went and found it. I knew a guy who owned a machine shop and factory next to an industrial complex that I managed. I met him when I was on site at about 6 a.m. and he was walking through the gates. He was dressed like a homeless man and told me he used our gates as a shortcut to get to his factory. He'd wander through and then slip through a hole in the fence to access his factory because he couldn't be bothered walking around. Anyways, got talking and it turned out he lived in the area, which at the time was a pretty rough area, full of industrial land and some rough residential areas, because his family used to own all the land around when it was farmland and had gradually sold it off, but he stayed in the family home. Short version, he was very wealthy. He was mad as a cut snake, but pretty canny and seriously rich. He told me the story that he had neighbors who had moved in and were parking their cars on his driveway. He asked them to stop and they didn't. He knew they were renting, so he brought the house and evicted them. I had a boss who would take the whole team out to dinner, order every appetizer and dessert on the menu for everyone, and expect us to order an entree on top of that. She gave my supervisor her black card for drinks for the team, including the interns, and told her to return it on Monday. I want to be that rich and awesome someday. Yeah, although I think a lot of these people are way undertaxed and complacent, I do at least salute those who treat their employees right. The mega-corporation owners who lose touch and grind their minimum wage employees into dust are the real issue. A former boss of mine was going through a contentious divorce. Her husband had skipped town down to Florida with some skank, ditching my boss and their son. Eventually, when the divorce was being finalized, it came to the point where they had to divide assets. She was the primary breadwinner, and the judge ruled that she either had to give him one of her vehicles, she had several large trucks, or buy him a new one. Her husband was no small fry. He stood 6'7" and was a former bodybuilder. So rather than give him one of her many trucks, she bought him a completely brand new Toyota Prius. This huge man looked like he was driving a clown car around town, and it was hilarious. Without talking about multimillionaires or billionaires, I've seen multiple people in my career who would have worked until more than 65 and started taking no crap in either corporate or government roles and were getting reprimanded for various things at like 45 to 55 years old. I've seen people literally verbally say to executive-level suits, "F you" in a group setting and just walk out, off into the sunset with no regrets. We have a disabled daughter and were able to put her through a private preschool for free in exchange for helping speak at the good things the school did for our daughter. We were speakers at their big charity ball and got placed at a rich table where everyone ate our story up. We were pretty poor at the time and were literally putting the fancy rolls in my wife's purse. We got to the auction portion of the night and one of the ladies told us that last year she won the auction for an all-expense-paid first-class luxury safari down in Africa, but she had no one to go with her, so she donated it back to the school this year. Halfway through the bidding of this safari that she had donated after paying for it, she goes, "Oh, my niece! She loves animals, I could have taken her!" and then went and won it again. She bid $15K that night, and she said about $12K to win it the first time, and that was 20 years ago. We went home and used those rolls to spruce up our Carl Buddig crappy deli meat sandwiches for the next week. My dad used to do handyman work for a fairly rich guy. He had a house in the hills with quite a few acres. Someone brought one of the hills next to him and started building a house. That guy didn't like how the house looked, so he bought it from them, halted construction, and had all traces of construction removed. Then he didn't like how much land was surrounding him. With no fence, his property line was now too far to see. So he had a fence put in just across the middle of his land so that he could see a fence. $5,200 bar tab added to the room bill, and they sign it and walk away like it's a pack of gum at Dollar General. Ed Sheeran spent $4 million to buy a neighbor's house after said neighbor filed noise complaints. I was lucky enough to get into a super premium high roller room at a casino in Nevada, not in Las Vegas. I watched a guy play blackjack with $25K in chips and do this. $100K win, lets it ride. $200K win, lets it ride. $400K win, lets it ride. $800K on the table and loses. Stands up, tosses the dealer a $1,000 chip and walks away like it was nothing. Pretty amazing. Either the guy has got true FU money or he's just an idiot. When I was 15, I was riding with my good friend and his incredibly wealthy family to a theme park when his car, a Mercedes with all the upgrades, started making weird noises. He pulled into a gas station and the car just wouldn't start. The eldest son came and picked us up and I didn't think anything out of the ordinary. Later that day, I found out that he left the car in the parking lot and went and bought a brand new Mercedes. What was a mayday moment on an airplane that the passengers didn't even notice? This was about 7 years ago now. I took my brother and 2 cousins up for a short sightseeing flight one morning in a Cessna 172. I knew there was some weather coming in, so I wanted to get it over with quickly. About 20 minutes in, I noticed the clouds getting worse and then some lightning off in the distance. Definitely time to head back. Heading back, I radioed my intentions, uncontrolled airport but with an FBO, and someone radioed back with the current winds. It didn't compute what they said, and in retrospect, I should have asked for clarification. Got back to the airport, and as I was on my final approach, I realized just how bad the wind is. Having a hard time keeping on centerline and eventually going around on the first try. By then I was starting to sweat bullets and planned on rerouting if the next attempt didn't go well. I make sure to turn the intercom off so my cousins in the back can't hear how panicked I'm becoming, though I did keep my cool through the whole thing. On second attempt, I've got the rudder pegged to the left and managed to get the wheels on the ground safely. I taxi to the park, shut down, jump out and start shaking with adrenaline and let out a huge sigh of relief. My cousins had no idea what had just happened. It was just an exciting flight to them. My brother kind of knew what was going on and I let him know what I was thinking later. Apparently I had an audience of guys from the FBO watching me as well, probably yelling at me to go somewhere else. I'm honestly surprised sometimes that I managed that landing with no incidents, especially since that was basically my first crosswind landing. Uncoordinated turn and then all the fuel went to one side of the plane, choked both engines, sputtered and cut out. 3,000 feet high, so I brought back the coordination and pointed it down a bit. The engines started back up. Yikes. Once, departing Burning Man in a private plane with a couple of passengers, my engine conked out. I didn't even follow the engine out checklist. I glanced at the fuel pressure gauge, didn't like what I saw, hit the switch for the auxiliary fuel pump and it came back to life. The whole event was over so fast the passengers never even noticed. Though, worst case scenario, I would have had to set it back down on the playa, which is pretty flat terrain as far as the eye can see. I was an aircraft mechanic for the Navy back in the day on A4 Skyhawks. Student pilot suddenly noticed his canopy light was on, indicating his canopy isn't all the way closed and locked. He decided it might help if he cracked the canopy open just a little bit and closed it again. I remember seeing that thing land as a convertible. We sent a couple of guys out in a pickup truck where they found the missing canopy in a farmer's field. I mean, it is a great story, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that he definitely noticed that concussive wall of air that would have been buffeting his head and surroundings for the remainder of the flight. Hopefully they found his eardrums near the canopy. I was in the process of getting my private pilot license. I was flying circuits solo. Before I took off, the CFO of the flight school asked me if I was sure that it was a good day to fly, as it was pretty windy. I was flying a Cessna 152 on a day with wind pushing 15 knots and turbulence around 20. I honestly don't know what I or anyone at flight school was thinking letting me, a 16-year-old, take off. Anyways, a few bumpy circuits went by with no problem. I actually got some great practice landing in turbulence. So the last circuit of the day, I was on a final loop with full flaps doing the absolute minimum speed for approach in a 152, not taking into consideration that the air is super turbulent. For those who don't know, when it's bumpy, you should be going a little bit faster on approach than usual. Anyway, I was quite close to the ground, maybe 300 to 400 feet, and I can hear the wind blowing over the sound of the engine, and then suddenly, no wind. I just lost 15 to 20 knots of almost direct headwind on final approach, with absolutely no airspeed to spare. I remember my shirt sleeves looked like they were inflating, and the plane's stall warning started screaming at me. The controls became totally useless, like a limp computer joystick. Thankfully, I had my hand on the throttle like my instructor taught me, and for whatever instinctual reason, good instructing probably, I gently pushed the throttle all the way and slightly lowered the nose. All of this took place in the span of about 5 seconds. I remember what I did, but not thinking about doing it. It's like when you drive somewhere and you suddenly realize you've arrived without remembering driving. Damn scary. Anyway, I landed the plane just fine and went home and took a nap. My parents said I was pale as a ghost when I got home. Flying is fun until it isn't. This entire story occurred in less than 10 seconds and should have ended with headlines on CNN. I'm a military pilot, not commercial, but it still could have ended in disaster. Flying a CH-47D Chinook helicopter in Iraq mid-July 2008 when the temperature was over 130 degrees. Packed full with 36 passengers at an altitude of only 100 feet and speed of 140 knots. Lower and faster than you'd ever fly in the US. We hit a thermal, which is a pocket of warm air, and it pushed us up. So I nosed the cyclic forward a little, that's like a joystick between your legs, and that normally helps maintain altitude. I was a brand new pilot flying with a combat veteran who wanted me to maintain altitude of 100 feet almost exactly. So, no higher than 120 or lower than 80 feet. Nosing the aircraft down kept us from going higher, but we immediately hit a downdraft and the aircraft started to fall like a rock. I pulled back on the cyclic as hard as I could to get the nose up, but it hit my body armor and wouldn't go back any further. I watched the altimeter drop all the way to 19 feet and miraculously we started falling and began to climb at the last possible second. During the debrief, the other pilot, who's now one of my closest friends, who had well over 1,000 combat hours, told me he had never been so close to dying before. I wasn't shook up until I heard that. Even typing this today gives me the chills. No idea what the guys in the back were thinking the whole time. Mine is from many, many years ago when I was a student pilot. I was 14, I think, at the time. I had about 15 hours done and was getting close to soloing for the first time, but still had a few hours and more landings to practice. I was doing some basics and getting ready to come back through with my instructor to practice some touch and goes for a bit. Coming back through, we had to pass through DTW's Bravo airspace, meaning we need permission to go through it. A few minutes before I was about to call for permission, my instructor suddenly got real quiet. I looked over at him and he looked real bad. I thought he was going to chuck up and looking for a bag, but then I noticed he wasn't breathing. I figured out where I was at and called up DTW approach. I declared a medical emergency and that my instructor was not breathing. I also told them I was a student and never landed on my own before and never in a large airport. Detroit approach was amazing at helping me. They gave me an option for DTW or Willow, but Willow would have added about 5 to 10 minutes since I was coming in from the southeast. I opted for DTW and they were great at giving me vectors while also getting the big jets out of the way. I remember hearing them tell several planes to go around and several more into a hold. Anyway, did my approach and made the most butter-smooth landing I've ever made in my life, even to this day. Ambulance was right there on the taxi waiting for me. Turns out my instructor, who was only 25, had had a heart attack. He ended up being okay. All in all, from first call to him in the ambulance was less than 10 minutes thanks to the air traffic control and DTW tower. Was on a 16-seater turboprop when suddenly there was a loud bang, all the lights went out and we dropped. We were looking around like, what's going on? Is this how we die? After a few minutes, the lights came back on and the pilot comes in on the PA saying, Sorry about that, folks, but we were just, struck by lightning. No need to worry, everything seems to be working, except for the radar. That's fried. I might have worried a little bit, you know? There's a lot of stories here where at least some of the passengers noticed, but I'm going to include them because some of them are fun anyway. But it really isn't comforting knowing that it's going on around you while you sit in your pressurized tube at an unsafe distance with no means of escaping a crash, is it? 56% of pilots admit falling asleep during the flight, whilst 29% admit that they woke up to their co-pilot asleep as well. I'm willing to bet that those are just the pilots who are honest about it, and the number is much higher. Was learning to fly when I worked for the government, so on my first flight with me taking off, we'd been climbing for about 5 minutes, and we were going through some gentle turns when the instructor says, we're gonna head back, I don't feel well. He takes over the stick and he looks ashen. He then starts to breathe erratically and says I need to help him control the plane. He radios tower, and up till now I was thinking it was a prank. Mayday, mayday. And he talks me through the whole thing. I was trying to talk to the tower, repeat info, read the gauges, remember my lessons, listen to him, and hope that he doesn't pass out. I was crapping myself. Takeoff is one thing, but landing? We land like a kangaroo with a rocket up its butt, and I'm surprised the wheels didn't fold. Must have been 4 big bounces, but it's a big runway luckily. Scrub speed, finally get the airplane to stop, and the instructor passes out. He's had a heart attack. He survived, but only for a few months before I heard he passed away in his sleep. But he got us down. I never continued those lessons. I'm a certified flying instructor at this point, and I was flying with a student. We see a spider in the cockpit. I'm okay with spiders, but I don't want it distracting the student, so I mesh it. Student missed the spider but saw my movement and asked what it was. I responded, "Oh, it was a spider. I killed it." As I'm glancing into the back seat area, I managed to casually add, "Why, are you scared of spiders?" without the student noticing the break in the sentence. Turns out the student is scared of spiders. For the rest of that flight, I squished spiders behind my student's back as they came forward from the nest that I'd just spotted in the back of the plane. He never knew. My buddy has a private license and we fly together often, just for his hours. I buy lunch, he gets hours, it's fun. I live in the Pacific Northwest and wanted to fly over Crater Lake one winter. Ceiling 8,000 feet, Crater Lake 6,000 feet. He doesn't have his instrumental yet, so we can't break ceiling. We fly over, have an easy time, take great pictures, and get back to the airport and go to the bar. He proceeded to tell me that was the most frightening thing he's ever done while piloting. Why? The single-engine Cessna we were in could glide 2 to 3 miles in an emergency. Crater Lake is 8 miles wide in diameter. In the middle, we'd be screwed. I asked him what he'd do, and he said, "I'd nosedive into the water. You want to swim in that crap and drown, or die a quick and mostly painless death? Frick my life." My friend's girlfriend is a flight attendant, and they had one trip where they ran out of alcohol. They were worried people would get mad or freak out because some people heavily rely on the stuff to help with the nerves of flying. But none of the passengers noticed because after they served the last drink, nobody ordered anything else. It's not a crazy life or death scenario, but I thought it was an amusing anecdote about the passengers not realizing something. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. There's never been a moment like this for me because you're always trying something else to save the plane. There's never been a real situation where I had to save a plane from imminent disaster. There's decisions I had to make that if I chose wrong, we could be in a bad spot, but never anything like, we're all gonna die now. Once when landing an RJ on a short runway out in the northwest, I was carrying a bit too much speed and caught a gust at the wrong moment in the landing flare. The plane lifted maybe 10 feet higher and I slowly lowered the nose. I realized at this moment that where the plane will touch down will not give me a whole lot of opportunity to stop before the end of the runway. As a matter of fact, it's probably not going to stop until we get into the trees at the end. I pushed the power up and we did a go-around, maybe 20 to 30 feet off the ground. The controllers vectored us around and we landed safely on try number 2. In the simulator, we do all the oh crap stuff, and even when a training event goes sideways, we still try to fly the thing until it hits something solid. I can't imagine ever giving up on a plane in flight. There's thousands of decisions made every day on flights by pilots that prevent a difficult situation from becoming dangerous. Flying these days is very cautious and conservative. Safety is always first and nothing is ever allowed to slide. When I was younger, I was with my dad who pilots a small plane. We were mid-flight and the engine just started slowing down and the plane started descending crazy fast. It somehow picked up again before hitting the ground. Mind you, this happened in under a minute. I didn't panic or anything because I had no idea what the frick was going on. I was like 3 or 4, so I only realized in hindsight what actually happened. During my first solo flight ever, I was really excited and wanted to video record the special occasion. So there I was, taxiing down the taxiway with one hand holding my phone. One thing about old propeller planes is that they're just like old cars and don't always drive straight. I suppose I was a little too concentrated on making sure my camera was properly angled and focused. The next thing I knew, my plane ended up rolling off the asphalt into the frickin' grassy ditch. I panicked. How the frick am I supposed to get this plane out of here? Over the radio, there was silence as the controller likely saw what happened from the tower. After a few seconds, probably still speechless at this point, she casually checked on me to make sure I was doing okay. To save my embarrassment, I tried to power up and to drive out of the grass back to the asphalt. Much to my surprise, it worked. I did my short flying as planned and returned to the hangar where my instructor was waiting. I have no idea how many people saw what happened, but from the look on his face, I'm pretty sure he knew too. And yes, that video of me driving a plane into a ditch still exists somewhere. I suppose this is the airplane equivalent of don't text and drive. The only example I can think of where several people messed up and passengers didn't notice, it was a friend of mine taking the wrong airplane. The aircraft was parked, fueled, and boarded correctly, but it was the wrong tail number. He actually did have an aha moment taxiing out. So he called dispatch and requested an amended release for the tail he was about to fly. But then he took off before receiving the amended release, so that got him a review board. He had messed up a few other things recently too regarding international paperwork, so he was downgraded to the right seat for a time. Passengers didn't know. It could have been my story, but every time I sat down in the cockpit, I checked the tail number versus the release. In one case, where there was a mismatch, the passengers did notice because the aircraft was swapped at the gate, causing a delay. The narrator honestly doesn't understand what's going on in this story, but figure that if any pilots are listening, they might. So enjoy it, you niche group of viewers. I wasn't the pilot, but I was a passenger on a glider. For those who don't know, gliders cannot get off the ground on their own. For this glider, we needed a tow plane, a 172. The 172 has a tow hook that they clip onto our nose. When we want to release, we go through a release procedure. The pilot in the 172 dips a wing to signal the release. He slows down, we dive. This creates slack, we nose up, then release the tow cable, the Cessna flies on its merry way, and we glide. Well, during the release procedure, something went wrong and the cable couldn't be released. The glider pulled on the tail of the Cessna and caused a ton of chaos, as flying a 172 with a glider that isn't synced with your motions is incredibly hard. Luckily, we both made it back in one piece, but that could very well have caused the 172 to stall and crash, and we'd be dragged down with them, watching helplessly. Long time ago, back in 1989, I was a first officer on the 747-100. We pushed back from the terminal in Anchorage and taxied out for a departure to Narita, Tokyo. We were full of people and very close to max takeoff weight. At the end of the runway, it was my takeoff, I stood on the brakes, stood the thrust levers up, and the engineer set full takeoff power. Released the brakes and off we trundled, and we rolled and rolled and rolled down the runway. It was not sparkling acceleration by any means. As the end of the runway loomed into sight and takeoff speed was still some distance away, with the lights going, red, white, red, white, red, 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 the captain said, and I quote, "Best you rotate." We were a good 20 knots below VR. Not being a total numpty, I slowly and smoothly rotated and the beast flew off the end of the runway like a lady. We slowly climbed away, cleaned up, turned and headed out west. Not a word was said for a long while. Finally, through 20,000 feet, the engineer launched himself at my performance figures. Nothing was wrong and we were at full power anyway. It turns out that extra cargo had been loaded in error and we were well overweight. Apart from me wetting the seat and a raised heart rate, the passengers were none the wiser. Passenger here, there was once when I was little. We landed and the pilots told us to put down our window shades to keep the plane cool. They were pretty insistent. Being a kid, I kept it open a little bit to peek out and saw after a while that we were taxiing backwards. I don't know what happened, but I don't think they wanted us to know that they'd made a wrong turn or something. Flight attendant here. We landed, everything went smoothly. As we were deplaning, the pilot steps out of the flight deck and goes, "Wow, I'm glad we made it. We lost 2 hydraulics on the way down." I'm a commercial helicopter pilot. Probably the closest moment to "we're screwed" I ever had was a few years ago. To set it up, I was ferrying a helicopter by myself to another location about 200 miles away. The helicopter I was flying was set up for IFR, instrument flying, and I was a fairly experienced IFR captain. The helicopter I was in did not like ice. That means that flying in the clouds when it's below freezing is basically impossible. This was in the high Arctic in early spring, so basically always cold. Weather wasn't great, but I still wanted to give the trip a shot. If it was bad, I'd just turn around and come home. About 50 miles out, the cloud ceiling was coming down and visibility was dropping. I was over a small frozen lake, and I could see at the other end of the lake that the clouds went right to the ground. At this point, I was about 300 feet above ground. I made the call to turn around and start a left-handed turn, but as I'm halfway through the turn, I enter cloud. Under normal circumstances, a VFR helicopter unintentionally entering cloud is often a death sentence. But I'm a trained IFR pilot in an IFR helicopter. I start a climb as I know there's rising terrain on the side of the lake. I don't mind flying in cloud. What I do mind is the fact that my helicopter started icing up instantly. I'm talking about instant, massive buildups of ice in a helicopter that doesn't like any ice. There's no way I can make it the 50 miles back to the airport to shoot an IFR approach, and I know the clouds are too thick to climb above them. I also can't descend because the ceiling is so low that I risk impacting the terrain if I don't pop out of the clouds soon enough. I'm running through the options in my head, but my heart rate is going up. This isn't something that normally happens. I'm not the type of pilot that gets into situations that scare me. I'm rapidly running out of time, so I head to a large, flat area, as indicated on my GPS and maps, set my radio altimeter, a device that tells you exactly how far above the ground you are, to beep at me when I reach 250 feet and start descending. I figure if I don't break out by 300 feet, I'm in some serious trouble. As I'm approaching 300 feet, I break out of cloud. Good visibility and a clear path all the way back to the airport. I do a normal approach and landing and shut down at our hangar. The blades are covered in ice. After I change my undies, we pull the helicopter into the hangar to let the ice thaw. The next day, the weather is beautiful and the trip goes off without a hitch. After flying for 10 years and thousands of hours, it was the only time I was actually scared. I'm glad I didn't have any passengers on board at the time. In 1994, while lining up for final approach to George Bush Intercontinental Airport in Houston on a sunny and humid 100-degree Fahrenheit day, our Boeing 747 hit a large downburst and suddenly dropped 1,000 feet in altitude without warning. All of the passengers were seat-belted in and completing their U.S. Customs declaration cards. The flight attendants were walking the aisles making sure that the passengers and aircraft were ready for landing. The sudden drop caused the flight attendants to hit the ceiling. Fortunately, none of them were injured, but the aircraft definitely experienced negative G-forces there for a few seconds. I was a C-141 navigator for my first Air Force assignment. We were flying a group of families moving back to the US from Japan. As we were in the approach at Travis Air Force Base, we had a massive multi-bird strike. It sounded like the world was ending inside the cockpit, it was so loud. Shattered glass that was coated in blood and feathers, bent radome, you name it. Flight controls were fine, but we declared an IFE and the co-pilot could see well enough out of his window to land. And I and the FE were over his shoulder to help spot however we could, and we landed without incident. The passengers deplaned and even complimented us on a great flight. I'll never forget the right side of the passenger bus driving away and the look of horror on those people's faces when they saw what the front of the airplane looked like. What happens when retail workers finally snap? 2 women came into the store screaming at each other. As I was coming out from the back, I gather from the yelling that one had nearly hit the other's car. Nearly, but no actual incident had occurred. It was a busy Saturday, people were starting to stare, I was trying to gather my wits, thinking how best to handle it, when my manager came flying in from nowhere. She just yells, "Either come in here and shop like people or go outside with the rest of the animals." One left and one stayed. A bunch of my co-workers quit. I worked at McDonald's in 1997 and we had Beanie Babies as Happy Meal toys at one point. It was insane. They literally had to buy a security cage to keep the toys locked down in the back. They were delivered with a security escort. People were ordering 100 Happy Meals with no food because we couldn't sell the toys by themselves. One day I heard a commotion up front and found my high school counselor reaching across the counter, grabbing one of the owners by the shirt because we were out of the pink flamingo. I'll never forget the look in her eyes. She had to be dragged out. It's scary how easy it can be to work people up into a frenzy. Worked at Radio Shack for 6 months while in college. Pretty much had at least one terrible experience per shift. The one that stands out the most was a guy who wanted us to honor the warranty on his iPhone cable. The thing was a mutilated mess. It had clearly stopped working and he had tried to fix it himself by cutting the cable apart and attempting to solder 2 wire pieces together. We calmly explained that we couldn't process a claim for an item that was willfully destroyed, and he started screaming in our faces about how Radio Shack is a scam, and "I'm going to sue all of you." Then he tries to whip my coworker, a 5-foot-tall, non-threatening woman, with his broken cable. She managed to turn her head and catch the wire with her hand before it caught her in the face. Myself and another employee chased him out of the store and called the police, but nothing came of it. Radio Shack shoppers really were the worst. Oh, my friend, I feel like by the end of this video we'll have plenty of other strong contenders for that title. I know full well from working with the Am I the Jerk channel just how often Karens are prepared to fly into physical assault mode when their retail workers inconvenience them with the truth. So I think this wire whipper is just the gentle tip of the iceberg. I worked at a ski resort when I was younger, fitting boots and sizing skis, among other things, in a ski rental shop. My first year, I worked at basically the Walmart of rentals, the cheapest option and the biggest store. So the week of Christmas, there were lines out the door every single day. I remember seeing my 2-week paycheck after the first 2 weeks around Christmas, and I'd worked 119 hours. It was absolute insanity. For another reference, the closest town had a permanent residency of less than 10,000 people. But during Christmas, it jumped up to 70,000 people trying to enjoy their vacation in the same spot. So one of these days, it was business as usual, a quarter-mile line out the door, non-stop craziness. I was at the bench closest to the door helping a lady when this kid walks up to my bench. I asked if I could help him and he said he had a reserved rental online and just wanted to pick it up. I said our store name and then said, "If that's where you reserved, you'll need to get back in the line and we'll help you as soon as we can." This 13-year-old kid said, "This is frickin' bullcrap," in front of the customer I was helping. I told him that quite literally every piece of equipment in our store was reserved, every single person in front of you has a reservation as well, and we have to help everyone. He started insulting me personally, saying I was a stupid witch and that he was going to report us to anyone he could because we weren't letting him skip hundreds of people doing the exact same thing he was doing. I think what made him really angry is that I'm a 6'3" woman and big. He was maybe 5 foot and something like 120 pounds, so when he called me a stupid B-word, it wasn't witch by the way, I literally laughed in his face. I was at no point threatened by this child, and at first it was funny. This lady left, I was laughing this kid and asking for the next person who was patiently waiting in line, and he starts yelling every cuss word in the book at me because I'm not helping him. Up until this point, my manager had been a complete jerk and I was not a fan of him. But he had had enough of the Christmas rush as well, and it was the perfect person to let off some steam on. I went and got my manager and told him this kid was personally attacking me and yelling cuss words in front of customers. So he walks up to the kid saying, "I'm sorry for the confusion, what's your name so I can take a look at your reservation?" And the kid lights up, thinking he finally beat the system and he'll get what he wants because he threw a public tantrum in front of everyone. My manager went and found his reservation. It was digital, but I'm pretty sure he printed it off for added dramatic effect. Came back and says, "Found it," and proceeds to rip it in half in front of the kid's face. "Don't ever treat someone that's trying to help you like that again. You're never allowed in our store again. And with every other store in town also being completely 100% booked on equipment, good luck skiing this weekend." I still didn't like the guy, but I respected him 1 point more for the rest of the season for standing up for me. I worked in a T-Mobile store. A lady came in screaming about how she bought a phone the previous day but didn't buy insurance and then dropped it in a pool immediately. She was demanding I give her a new phone for free. But she wasn't even our customer. She was a Verizon customer. She screamed at me for about 10 minutes demanding I call our manager. She then started yelling at other customers about how awful we were. We called the cops. This tale takes place roughly 22 years ago at a community college bookstore. As with any college bookstore, the start of the semesters were incredibly busy. In order to help ease the insanity in our little place, we set up a table outside the front door for doing returns. And that's where I was stationed for the day. People got in line, they got to me, I processed the paperwork for their return and sent them inside to the cashiers. This is an important point. I had no cash, no ability to process cards, just me, a table, a stack of paper, and some pens. That's it. Well, a middle-aged lady gets to me. She's obviously not lacking for funds. Her son has dropped all of his classes and she's just returning his books. Okay, cool. I do all the paperwork, hand her back the document, and direct her inside. And she goes ballistic that she has to wait in line again. I mean, starting nuclear wars ballistic. The customers in line behind her actually went to my manager to file formal statements about her behavior. Not my behavior, hers. Because they knew. I took a break and shook it off. Everyone has bad days, and I know that I have the customer's statements to back me up. A few days pass and the manager gets a call. It's the president of the college. With a complaint. The woman called the president of the college to complain about me personally. So my manager and I head off to a meeting with the president and the woman. We walked in calm and polite. The woman instantly begins her tirade, still screaming and cursing. My manager pulls out the statements and without a word hands them to the president. The president calmly reads them. I don't remember exactly what he said, but I do remember watching the woman turn more and more red. I do remember the word entitled used a bunch of times. And I do remember him saying, "Don't waste my time ever again," before he showed her the door. I had a customer who used a racial slur to describe one of my employees for no other reason beyond the fact that he saw them and was offended that one of them was doing their job by doing the oil change that he came to us to do. I told him to apologize to my employee or we'll push his car right out of the bay without oil. He refused, so we did just that. Told him he's more than welcome to buy his own oil and finish his oil change himself, and that he'll be charged double for all services here on out if he comes into my store. I had no problem telling this racist idiot to go screw himself. When I worked in the tool department at Sears, a guy wanted to get a replacement on his tape measure. I couldn't replace it because it was the tape that was messed up due to the guy mistreating it, and not caring because in his mind, Sears will replace it for free. The guy threatened to go out to his truck and get his shotty, come back in and shoot you, points at me, you, points at my manager who's taken over already, and you, points at my coworker who's standing nearby. I gave him the, "Why haven't you done it yet?" look, and he left. I worked at Sears. I was ready to die. Say what you will about all the crappy jobs I had as a student, none of them jaded me enough to the point where I could stare down a potential attacker and dare him to end my misery. Also, leaping to that threat over what, a $5, $10 tool? Wild. I worked at a pawn shop for a couple of years. We had a customer pawn a chainsaw which turned up stolen and was confiscated by police, which causes the store to lose money and police to be aware that he's a known thief. He came back something close to 3 months later to pawn something else. I didn't recognize him right away. I asked him if he'd pawned anything before, and he said yes. So I asked his last name and entered it into our computer, which promptly said, stolen. My first thought was, really? You came back here? I gave my boss, it's literally a 2-person store, a not very frequently used signal to discreetly call the police. Meanwhile, I started acting like I was working on his loan and stalled a bit. Just a couple of minutes later, a few police cars pulled up and the officers quietly walked in and he immediately gave up. I didn't really have to say anything to him. The handcuffs spoke for themselves. When the old guy I was serving kept looking at my chest and making creepy facial expressions, I asked him if he wanted a drink or if he was just going to keep staring. He excitedly put his hands out and went, "Oh, I can do more than stare," and tried to walk behind the bar. I told him to get the F out, to which he seemed very shocked and outraged, so I just started to loudly shout back to him, "Sir, please do not try to grope my chest, you need to leave," over and over again until the rest of the bar was staring and he was panickedly whispering for me to please be quiet, so the wife I didn't know he came with wouldn't hear him. Can only imagine the argument that unfolded while she was dragging him out. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was 18 and worked at a local grocery store in the produce department. Beyond regular duties, we made fruit trays on weekends. Nothing fancy, just a variety of cut-up fruit in large red bowls. A guy came in after 10 p.m., we closed at 11, and asked for a tray with specific fruits. I tell him we unfortunately don't make custom trays, And then the 16-year-old guy who was also on shift with me overheard and told him it was slower tonight so he can do it for him. He says, "Okay, good." No gratefulness displayed at all. This coworker of mine is legit always extra kind to customers, and it's actually quite admirable. 20 minutes later, my coworker comes out of the back and presents it to this customer. He immediately starts screaming at him about how bad it looks. He yells things like, "That looks like absolute crap. Frick, are you an idiot?" And I run over to see what the problem is. The fruit tray looks absolutely standard, but this guy isn't having it. He smashes it on the ground and keeps screaming about how we are, quote, retarded, and that we've wasted his time. I snap and tell him to get the F out. He postures up. Keep in mind this is a guy in his 40s ready to fight some teenagers over a fruit tray. Numerous other employees run over and yell at him to get out. He says, "I'll be back for all of you retards," and runs towards and out of the sliding doors. All of this was on camera, luckily, so management calls the cops regarding his actions and that last threat. They end up arresting him later on because apparently he also had some warrants. I hope the fruit was worth it, idiot. Working as assistant general manager at a fast casual restaurant, and some 40-something woman starts going off on my cashier. I round the corner from the desk to see her dump soup all over our front-end cooler and knock a bunch of stuff onto the ground. I tell my cook to call 911 and say there's a woman causing a disturbance and breaking stuff. The address is next to the phone. I walk up and stand behind the counter and put on my happiest manager face, so overly happy that it drove the woman even more into a fit. So, raging cyclone-mad Karen starts knocking crap off the counters, throws 2 IBC root beers on the ground, and starts yelling at another guest who tried to come over and defuse the situation. I hold out for another few minutes before 2 cops run in. She's been screaming for a refund for 10 minutes at this point and breaking stuff. The cops walk in, I point at her and say, "Get her the F out of my restaurant," and she's arrested. Apparently her soup was too hot. Thanks for the frickin' headache, Karen. I comped 7 meals of other guests and had to work a double because my cashier was in a state and had to deal with the cops. Frick food service. I'm so glad that I'm out. Guy seated in the freezer of Trader Joe's, pants down, staring at a fresh turd he'd just laid in the middle of the aisle. It couldn't have been more obvious that the guy was trying to return stolen merchandise. He lost the receipt, didn't know when it was purchased, paid with cash so he couldn't just easily look up the transaction on a credit card. He said he'd call his friend to ask if they knew when it was purchased, and then he took out his iPhone without pressing a button and started to talk on it. I was like, I can clearly see the home screen with no call happening. When he got off the phone, I got a little bold and in my best retail manager voice said something to the effect of, "Oh, that's cool. Is that a new update where you can talk to someone without actually calling them?" And he left after that. Well, pretty slick line. It's always the stupidest people who seem to think that all other people are dumber than them, isn't it? There must be an expression for that way of thinking. It's like the Dunning-Kruger effect, but the thing you think you're good at is life. Oh, my best story comes from my manager, on my behalf. I'd recently had a very bad experience in my first paid job and quit because I felt so insecure about my appearance and ability to work in a typical work environment. I have achondroplastic dwarfism, making me 4 feet tall and disproportionate. So instead, I was volunteering in a small-town charity shop to gain some confidence again. My manager knew all about this, and I was in the back room when this guy comes in and rings the bell. I walk in and he just stares at me, laughs, and says, "Is this Santa's workshop?" And I just stand there. My manager, who's at the till, says coldly, "Excuse me?" And the guy looks taken aback. "Sorry, I didn't expect to see someone like that here." They both look at me and I just awkwardly said something like, "Well, I am," and shrugged. And it would have been fine until he said, "So, do you make the toys?" My manager walked out from behind the counter, pointed out the door and said flatly, "Do not disrespect my staff. Get out." The guy started apologizing. "Out!" He still seemed to find the situation hilarious and left. Man, I miss that manager. She was the best. Thank you, Bianca. I used to work the reception desk at a tattoo shop. I had many get the frick out moments, but the one that stands out was a guy coming in with his girlfriend to get his name tattooed on her. She looked terrified, wouldn't make eye contact with me, didn't talk directly to me, and barely spoke. The whole conversation was the guy giving me her license and saying, she wants my name tattooed on her. I took way more info from both of them than I needed and tried to get the woman to come out back alone so I could talk to her, but the boyfriend wouldn't have it. I eventually went back and got the shop manager, a big dude, and told him what was up. I came back to the counter and lied, saying we didn't have walk-ins that day, and the guy got angry. Started yelling, shop manager came out and physically removed them from the shop. I called the cops and provided all the info I had. Was basically told they couldn't do anything unless it was self-reported. I still think about that woman all the time. I work at a Dutch 24/7 gas station. This German kid, between 20 to 25 years old, came into the shop drunk while driving, looked for beer, which we're not allowed to sell, and then got angry because he thought I'd hidden them from him. He wanted to start a fight and wanted to drive off in his car. That was impossible since I locked the door and alerted the cops. He lost his driver's license and got a huge fine which he had to pay instantly. What a jerk. The one that jumps out to me was when a customer was trying to return a wall mount that was 6 months out of policy. He was being snide and just laying into the customer service rep saying things like, "I know you can do this, I return crap out of policy all the time," or, "Well, if you weren't so stupid, it would be done by now." He ended up making her start to cry when he said, "Jesus Christ, are you retarded?" Well, she worked with special needs kids as a volunteer, and this pushed her over the edge. I walked over to him and told her to go into the back and asked him why he thinks it's okay to talk like that. I'm guessing since I'm a male and a manager, he decided to be respectful. I was angry beyond belief at how he had made her cry though, so I cut off his explanation and told him to get out. He said, "Now hold on, let's all calm down," and I grabbed my radio piece and told security to go ahead and get the police on the way down there for someone trespassing. He left so fast at that comment that he forgot his wall mount. Jerk. This was over the phone. The customer was unhappy with their purchase, so I sent another one out to them in case it was defective. He called me later that week saying the new one had the same problem and he'd get violent if it wasn't solved. He was in his 80s, but I said, "You know what, we'll come pick it up and you can buy from somewhere else." It wasn't worth the hassle for a tiny commission. I used to work for Quick Lube in Alaska for a boss named John who was a decent manager and enjoyed handling customers. He was professional and kind and knowledgeable, but loved to tell a couple of stories of customers he'd told off. The coldest move was a customer who was berating him. The customer reached out and stuffed a business card into John's shirt pocket, demanding to see the boss right now. John said he took the card back out, shoved it in that guy's pocket and said, "The buck stops here, get the frick out of my shop." I've carried that as a reminder that professionals take crap as part of their job, but nobody should take too much. A guy I knew who worked at Dunkin' Donuts would use the line, "My manager says I only get to tell one customer to F off a year and I'm not going to waste that on you." Not quite the right type of answer, but relevant. I mean, this suggests that this guy actually had a really low tolerance for customer bullcrap since he had this zinger ready to go, and he's almost certainly still getting in trouble for it if the customer wants to report things, but I can't blame him. I worked at a barbecue restaurant for my first job. We had a takeout area where the customers can watch you cut the meat and pack the side dishes. The girl at the register rang up a quart of potato salad when the customer asked for a pasta salad, so I packed potato salad. When the customer received his order, he looked through it and flipped out when he saw potato salad and started screaming at me. Go figure. Unbeknownst to all of us, the owner of the store heard the commotion and was on the other side of the swing door behind me, which had a small window. The angry customer decided to throw a quart of potato salad at me, which I ducked to avoid. It splattered against the window on the swing door as the owner was looking out of it. The owner burst through the door. He's 6'4" and very built, grabbed this scrawny guy by his shirt collar, and that guy straight up had fear in his eyes. My boss literally threw him out the door. Went back to the register to ask the girl what his total was, grabbed the cash, and tossed it out the door at the angry customer as he was collecting himself off the ground. It was an awesome scene. In short, my former boss threw a customer out the door after the customer threw potato salad at me. I was a supervisor in a store where people could trade in goods for other secondhand stuff. One guy stands out, and I had a lot of imbeciles to deal with over my 7 years there. This guy had previously bought a phone from us and came back demanding we give him his money back or a new phone as the one we sold him had a crack in it. As it's secondhand, we might have missed the hairline crack during our testing. I thought, no biggie, so we swapped it. Thought that was the end of that. About a month later, he's the first customer of the day and he's cussing us out because his phone isn't working. He has a warranty, so we take the phone, open the casing, and what do we see? The phone is water damaged. 100% not how he would have sold it, since that's the first thing checked during a test. We tell him his warranty is void. Him and his wife freak out and start shouting, saying they'll stay here all day and tell others not to shop with us. I'm like, you're wasting your time, at least I'm paid to be here. Obviously, they don't like that, but he also slips up by saying, If I'd known it was water damaged, don't you think I would have pulled the sticker off so you guys wouldn't notice? The guy straight up confirms he's a fraud, keeps demanding his money back. At this point, I call center security and tell them what's up. They come in and say he has to leave. He says it's a public place. I decide to chime in and state it's private property, he's banned, and he can get the frick out. The guy won't leave when security demand it, so they get on the radio to the cops as the guy is now technically trespassing. His dumb harpy of a wife screeches at him, and they both hightail it out. All before I'd had my morning tea. What contenders have you seen for the world's stupidest criminal? My old roommate's a cop. He came home to tell me an ATM was robbed after hours for $15,240. The next day, the man who robbed the ATM deposited $15,240 into his personal account at the bank he robbed the night prior. I'll believe it, people are stupid as hell. There was this kid at my university the first year I was there. He ended up stealing a few books from the bookstore, so about $800 worth of stuff. Later the same day, he tried to sell them back to the bookstore that he stole them from. Yeah, it didn't end too well for him either. My mum's cousin was a bank robber. The time he got caught, he went into a bank, scoped the place out, left to go back to his bike. This motherfricker robbed banks on a frickin' bicycle, put the mask on, robbed the bank. The police see the tape, see that the bank robber was wearing the exact same clothes as the guy who left less than a minute before, and that was that. My ex stole a car and went to pick up his friend at the police station in said stolen vehicle. He parked right in front of a cop. The cop ran the plates and escorted him into the building. The next day, he was on the news as the most stupid criminal in town. A lot of people are asking me why I dated him. Well, he never told me that, to be fair. One day, I decided to Google his name and I found the article. Learn from me, ladies and gentlemen. Google your partner's names. You never know what they're hiding. And yes, best thing I did was break up with him. Mistakes were made. Every day I see a big black SUV with sheriff written on the side parked in the driveway across the street. I don't know if the guy is the sheriff or works for them, but one night I woke up to a dozen sirens outside. Turns out some idiot tried breaking into Sheriff Dude's house while he was home and his vehicle was right frickin' there. I knew a guy who got busted selling Mary J. He went to his hearing at the court and went through the metal detector with an Altoid tin full of E in his pocket. It set off the detector, sheriff's deputies searched him, found the pills, and arrested him on the spot. Look, criminals, I don't really want to tell you how to do your job, but it feels like this was such a no-brainer. If you really need to have your special treats the second you finish your trial, surely you can just leave it in your glove box. Were you planning on popping that in front of judge, lawyers, and bailiffs? A professor I had was a retired police detective. He told us about an armed robbery at a dry cleaner's in a bad part of town. When the robbers looked away, the cleaner's owner took the opportunity to grab a weapon and disarm the robber. The robber turned and ran, misjudged, and went through the glass door. Police arrived on scene and noted, among the shards of broken glass on the cleaner's floor, a hunk of something flesh-colored. It turned out to be a piece of human ear. Detective retrieves the hunk of ear and goes to the county's hospital emergency room. Shortly after the detective arrives at the ER, a man who matches the robber's description walks in, holding a towel to the side of his head. Detective asks to look and sees that a hunk of the man's ear had been cut off. Detective holds up the piece of ear he retrieved from the crime scene, and sure enough, it's a perfect fit. He places the man under arrest and waits while the ER doc sews the hunk back onto the arrestee's ear. He asks, "Why on earth did you decide to rob a dry cleaner's of all places?" And the arrestee replies, "I've been watching that dry cleaner's for a while. I'm sure they've taken a lot of cash. I noticed that there's an armored car there twice a day." The detective explains, "Yes, the armored car is there every morning to drop off police uniforms for dry cleaning and returns every afternoon to pick them up after they've been cleaned." Took a vehicle burglary report where the victim found a driver's license on her driver's seat that the suspect must have left behind. It seems damning, but if he had any criminal smarts, he'd just say his license was stolen and the thief would have dropped it while breaking into his new victim's vehicle. Without any other evidence, the case would have gone nowhere. The next day, I take a report at a church that was a couple of blocks away from the vehicle burglary. This guy stole the video cameras from the building. He must have thought the footage came with the camera because when we checked the video, there was a high-def close-up of the suspect's face as he removed the camera. Good evidence, sure, but I still didn't know who the guy was until I looked at the license I collected the day prior and saw that it was the exact same guy. My dad's a cop, and I remember that he called me one night and said he wanted to tell me how glad he was that I'm not as stupid as the guy he'd just arrested that night. An idiot high schooler was caught stealing booze after his fake ID was rejected. His fake ID said he was born in 2001, 3 years younger than he actually was. The poor guy couldn't work out why his ID didn't work. My dad recommended that he pay better attention in math class. I'm a 911 dispatcher in Florida. Sometimes confused or drunk people knock on the wrong door or try to get into a house thinking it's theirs, but it isn't. It's an honest mistake, but the homeowner is rightfully very afraid, thinking that they're about to be robbed or worse. Well, I had this kid, must have been in his early 20s and clearly on something, calling me going absolutely crazy that someone was trying to kill him and take his property and commit the unspeakable act on his girlfriend, etc. I send units code 3 to this guy thinking it's a burglary in progress. Turns out the guy just ordered a pizza and forgot about it. We scared the delivery guy half to death. Worked as a surveillance contractor and was asked to find footage of a copper heist. They'd been ripping all the external piping from old school buildings. It was crappy CCTV and at night, so not much hope of identification. A couple of cameras were offline, so I went back to check why. Turns out they came back a second night and ran out of copper to steal. Perfect face shots of the guy jimmying it from the front. He had his t-shirt pulled up over his face, and he'd quickly pull it back up as it fell off constantly. At one point, he yanked the cam down to reveal his partner being used as a stepladder. When Thief 1 got tuckered out, they swapped, and Thief 2 did the same thing. The constable took one look and was like, "Oh yeah, I know them. I'll go pick them up now." One of my finest moments was when I drunkenly gave a cop a fake ID and then said, "Oh wait, can I have that one back?" And he was like, "That one?" No. Can't go into too much detail, but one youth shot another in the leg after a fight in their apartment complex. The victim was able to describe the weapon the shooter used in detail. We got the perp's name from another kid who knows him from school. My partner looks up his Instagram and wouldn't you know it, there he is posing with the weapon described to us exactly. Social media is a treasure trove of wannabe gangsters incriminating themselves. Went to a job of 2 males attempting to break into a car. Job description said that they'd been at it for at least an hour. Got there, and the car was theirs. They'd apparently locked themselves out. Checks confirmed it did indeed belong to one of their mums. On their person was stolen mail and heaps of phones and new stuff in boxes in the car, so they got arrested for theft anyway. It ended up that the driver's door they'd been trying to break into was the only locked door out of the 4. It was unlocked everywhere else the whole time they were there. Mail turned out to be junk mail and 1 wedding invitation. Well, yes. I was about to say that you can't necessarily be blamed for being caught in an incidental search of their person, but those final details definitely launched these lads into the stupid criminal semi-finals. Well done, guys. A few more heists like this and you could take home the grand prize. Teen gets fired from Red Lobster, returns to rob same restaurant that night. They refuse to give him money from the register, so he grabs the charity coin box, muscular dystrophy or something like that, and then he leaves on a bicycle. I left to go find him and saw coins scattered about, followed the trail off some time which leads me to him hiding in the bushes at a church. Bicycle was leaning up against the bush that he was in. Oh, from my local newspaper. 2 young men in a pickup truck on a back road stopped a courting Amish couple in a buggy and told the couple to give them all of their money. Spoiler alert, the Amish generally don't have money. They do have good memories though and told the cops the license plate number. The inept criminals were locals too and should have known better than to try and rob the Amish. The Amish are not to be trifled with, see? They can and will aggressively hand-carve you a set of high-quality table and chairs. They can also weld like no one's business. Beware the Amish. We had an inmate that would constantly call Crime Stoppers on his contraband cell phone and try to get them to give him the reward if he confessed to his crimes. He did this several times a month. I'm not a cop myself, but about 10 years ago I got held up and robbed by a group of 3 guys with knives. All they wanted was the money in my wallet, so me being the smart guy not wanting to mess with knives just obliged. At the end of the ordeal, he put the knife to my throat and said, "If you ever tell the cops my name is," and gave me his name, "I'll slice your throat right now." So I went home, called the cops, told him where it happened, and gave them the name the guy told me. The name instantly rung a bell with them since the guy had come into contact with the police in the past. The cops went to the spot where I was robbed, and they were laying an ambush for a new guy to appear. They could instantly identify the guy, he was arrested, and that's about it. It happened in the Netherlands. I don't know his sentence or anything. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I went to a domestic violence call where the woman claimed her husband had hit her. When I asked her how it happened, she told me he couldn't provide the kind of life she wanted him to give her. She stated since he had had a heart attack and got lupus, he wasn't working, so she decided she'd start inviting some friends over to do the deed with her for money. Mind you, she's telling me, a fully uniformed officer, all of this. She says he should act as the person who handles the money for her, i.e. her pimp. She then calls someone to come over and tells her husband that after she gets paid for the act, he should hold the guy at knife point and take the rest of his money. She said he refused to help her with this, so they got into an argument. He pushed past her to get out of the apartment. She claimed that was the attack that she had called me for. I asked her if she understood she had just admitted to planning a felony crime. She looked shocked that planning a working girl and robbery was wrong at all, and didn't get why I wasn't arresting her husband for trying to remove himself from her stupid plan to get them both arrested. For all of those asking if I arrested her, I did not. The husband is the real hero here. Due to him refusing to be involved in anything, this plan of hers never actually made it off the ground. If the victim had actually been invited over, I could have arrested her for an offense. I did write a report and passed it along to the robbery and vice units, as well as notifying my supervisors. Best I could do that night was separating them. I drove the husband across town to remove him from the situation. The penal code in each state differs slightly on what charges are considered arrestable while still in the planning stages. This wasn't something I could arrest on, mainly due to not having a direct victim I could point to. Basically, because this was a what-if scenario, it would be the equivalent of me mumbling to myself I should punch that guy in the face. If someone had been invited over or I'd gotten the name for the possible victim, I could have arrested her for it then. In short, being stupid and making stupid plans isn't a crime. Crimes require victims. My buddy is a cop and told me about this one kid in particular he dealt with for years. No cleverness to him, numerous times he walked into his neighbor's garage in broad daylight and just stole his bike. Constantly stole from stores in plain view, even the occasional minor attack or burglary. He always got caught, like never had gotten away with any of his hundreds of crimes, but because he was a minor, there were never any real repercussions. A few days before he turned 18, my friend and another officer went to his house to basically remind him that if he did anything after that, he'll face real punishment as an adult and he'll get 0 breaks. It was a last-ditch effort to be helpful. 2 days after his 18th birthday, he was caught committing an armed robbery. Pretty sure he's doing a few decades behind bars now. Not a cop, but worked at a 7-Eleven in a rough part of Chicago. Had 2 guys come in and ask for 2 bottles of Grey Goose. I asked for their IDs and they handed them over, and I grabbed the 2 bottles from behind the counter to ring them up. They proceeded to grab the bottles and book it out of there, leaving their IDs on the counter. I just called the police, they came in asking for a description of the thieves, and I handed them the IDs. The cops were in disbelief at the stupidity, left and went to the address of one of the IDs that was about 2 blocks away. About 15 minutes later, they walked in with the 2 guys and bottles of Grey Goose. The poor guys didn't even have the chance to open them. I confirmed it was them, didn't press charges, took the bottles of Grey Goose back, and went on with my overnight shift. Oh, sweet boys. Some people are too stupid to take seriously even when they try really criminal stuff. I have to imagine that they were shuffling their feet and looking at the floor like 9-year-olds caught sneaking around after bedtime. I got a call a couple of years ago to a lady who said she was being threatened. I respond to a very rural area, and she shows me her cell phone, and it's a chain mail text from an unknown caller. The message showed a picture of a girl with a gag in her mouth, and she's looking at the camera and holding a sign with both hands that said, "Help." The text of the message stated she was in Amsterdam, and if she didn't forward the text to 10 people, look what happened to this other girl who didn't. I explained to this lady that it was a hoax and explained what a chainmail message is. She refused to believe me and became argumentative. When I offered to contact Interpol for her, she didn't know what that was, and that wasn't good enough, and just kept saying the girl needed help. I asked her if she knew the girl, and she said no, and believed that the girl tried to send her the message using any made-up numbers she could, instead of contacting anybody she knew. My reasoning was once again shot down, and she said again that the girl just needed her help. I remember driving away and the lady screaming at me that I needed to help that girl, and I responded with a single no over my PA as I quickly sped away. Neither of those women were ever heard from again. Forward this video onto 10 people. So I was sitting at the station doing paperwork. Looking out the window, and a few yards away is a bus stop. A young lad is smashing the glass of the bus stop as a way of showing off to a couple of girls. So I sigh, walk about 20 yards over to him, and arrest him. Another time, a lad had just broken into a pharmacy and stolen some substances, sleeping tablets, which he'd started taking, maybe to hide the evidence. Who knows how these people's minds work? There's a foot chase which gets slower and slower and slower, and I ended up just slowly walking up behind him. The guy fell asleep while I was booking him in. Once, when I went to the grocery store, there were a few officers inside getting statements from some of the staff. Apparently some guy had dropped a gallon-sized Ziploc bag full of smack right on the floor while he was walking out. Staff members noticed it right away and called the cops, right before the guy came back into the store demanding that the staff return his smack. He was still arguing with and threatening them when the police walked in the door. There was a kid who sold substances on the floor of my college dorm who wasn't the brightest. One night he was driving back to the dorm and a cop car came up behind him and turned on their lights. This idiot stored all of his stuff in his car and assumed they were pulling him over for possession. He proceeded to drive through a red light and pulled into the dorm parking lot to hide. Mind you, his car was covered in bumper stickers, had a kayak rack, and a vanity plate to top it all off. The parking lot only had one entrance and exit too. Apparently he thought the police car wouldn't go through a red light to follow him. Long story short, they were just going to warn him for having a taillight out and nothing more. Instead, he ended up in a local jail and expelled from the college. The funniest part is that his ledger of all transactions and the dollar amounts, his products and buyers, was right there in his car. He was one stupid criminal. Ex-police officer here. I pulled over a guy for having a brake light out. Nothing serious. Ran his plates and the likes. It all came back clean and nothing seemed off until he exclaimed, "I haven't had any alcohol," in an over-enthusiastic tone. For some reason, he just thought saying this was a good idea. So, nearly got away with it. Vodka doesn't smell. I breathalyzed him, and the legal limit in England is 35. He blew over 60, arrested on the spot, and his vehicle was towed. Idiot. My father is a police officer. He once told me a story of a call he went to for reports of a man and woman fighting in an apartment. The call came from neighbors for noise complaints and concern. He was third shift, so this was at some point very late at night when all the crazy people were up and at him. When he arrived, he could hear the yelling through the door. He knocked and let them know it was the police. There was immediate silence and a man answered the door completely undressed. The exposed man didn't even give my dad a chance to speak or ask questions. The first thing he said was, "I don't have a knife behind my back." Well, he definitely did have a knife behind his back, and the woman he was with had smack, which is what they were fighting over. They both got arrested that night. Pro tip, don't do illegal substances, and if you do, don't answer the door for the cops. As a teacher, I remember asking a student who was looking a bit out of it what was up. Sleepily, she replies, "Didn't get much sleep." I ask her if everything's fine, as you'd normally do. "Yeah, it's okay. My uncle got arrested last night, though." The school was in a low socio-economic area, so it's not as unusual as you'd think. Anyway, she tells the story, "Uncle's so stupid. He and his mate thought it would be a good idea to steal a local ATM. They smashed through the windows, put chains around it, and dragged it out with their big truck. They decided it worked well, so they ended up dragging it all the way home." And she gives a half smile. "The thing is, the cops found them easy. They just followed the marks on the road all the way to the front door." I knew this kid in high school who got pulled over for a minor traffic violation. He decided it would be funny to jump out of the car and book it down the street. The cops, of course, go chasing after him, and after a couple of blocks he stops, puts his hands in the air and yells, "Psych!" The cops didn't think it was funny, so they tackled him to the ground and put him under arrest. His parents were wealthy, so he didn't get in that much trouble, but it was still so incredibly stupid. Just for the record, I think that everyone who's caught mid-crime should try this. It hurts nobody, and the idea of someone falling for it tickles me just so very much. Give it a go, bank robbers. You've got nothing to lose. See how it plays out. I'm Swiss. We got mandatory military service duty. When you do this, you usually get to keep your army rifle as a personal rifle at home for the following years, and every year there's a repetition course for about 3 weeks until you're 30 or something. During that time, you keep your weapon at home. You're supposed to keep it locked away, but most people I know just toss it in a corner of the attic or put it below the bed or something. And no, you don't get to keep any ammo. Anyway, a friend was having a party at home. Some friends called him that they're going to show up at his place soon. The door rings, and he's pretty drunk, and he thinks it's a fun idea to take the rifle, unloaded and without any ammo, but still, and open the door and point it out to scare his friends. Unfortunately, it wasn't his friends, but the cops, called by a neighbor because of the noise disturbance. I don't know all the details, but he doesn't have that weapon anymore. Still had to do the rest of his military service, but unarmed, which you can do without problems depending on your function within the army. He also probably paid a fine. Not a cop, but I used to work at a smoke shop. 3 guys broke in through a large window, left blood everywhere just trying to get in, walked right past the high-end, fancy, expensive glass and proceeded to grab as many cheap glass pipes as possible. They went back through the window, breaking 2 or 3 of these pipes in the process of crawling through the tiny hole they'd made, probably cutting themselves even more than they had already had, and hightailed it across the street. They seemed to have dropped damn near everything while running because there was literally a trail of broken glass leading to the apartment across the street. Cops came, followed the glass trail leading directly to someone's door, looked over the little fence to their bottom floor balcony and saw 3 guys all cut up, smoking from a broken pipe. We estimate they took 8 or 9 pipes. They were smoking with the sole survivor. They turned out to be regulars in that store. Never saw them again after that. What is the dumbest advice you've heard from an idiot? Well, relationship falling to pieces? Have a baby. To be on the safe side, it should be phrased as, if you have trouble in your relationship, have a baby. You'll soon forget all about your current trouble. One of my stepdaughters said, I never carry any ID. That way when the police pull you over, they can't tell if you have warrants or not. Yeah, that'll work. I had a health science teacher, in college, mind you, tell the entire class they should all just stop taking their prescription meds because that's what's killing you. That laying with a virgin cures human immunodeficiency virus. Oh, your pen stopped working? Take the ink tube out and suck on the open end of it. That'll make it work again. You can guess what happened. That you can blast bleach up your hoo-ha to clean up the little swimmers, stopping them from making you pregnant after doing the deed. My dad worked as a car salesman for 1 year back in the late 90s. I graduated college in 99 and got my first real job that fall. I'd been driving my grandfather's '82 Chevy Celebrity, which reeked of cigar smoke, and started commuting from rural Maryland to Beltway, Virginia, which was about an hour. I got in an accident involving a deer carcass, bent the frame. My father recommended getting a new car. I'd only 1 or 2 paychecks under my belt, and instead of advising me to look for something used or just doing what I could to keep the Celebrity going, he said I should go to his old dealership, talk to his friend, and get a brand new 2000 VW Jetta. He said since I'd just graduated college, the best plan would be to sign a student lease. That is, a lease with a limit of 15,000 miles a year, despite my 100-mile-a-day commute. I did exactly what he recommended. Totally my fault for not doing the math. I was a dumb kid, too excited by the thought of getting my first brand new car per parental recommendation. I eagerly put a whopping $1,000 down. Cut to 4 years later, the balloon hits and I'm over double the allotted miles. Following my dad's advice, I wound up paying about 30 grand for a 16 grand vehicle. I know this one woman who has serious genetic abnormalities, and if she were to get pregnant, she needs to be monitored by specialists prior to conception and labeled high risk, as one specific health problem could cause the child she carries to develop brain damage or life-threatening congenital problems. Her preacher told her it was wrong to use birth control, or get ultrasounds, or give birth in a hospital, or vaccinate her children. So, she's not getting any healthcare whatsoever besides homeopathy and prayer at church. She's encouraging others with the same condition to live the same lifestyle, because she has one borderline healthy child, not mentioning the other one who didn't make it. Listen, I know none of you like Mr. Liberal wishy-washy narrator voicing his opinions on this stuff, but get your medical advice from medical professionals and your spiritual advice from spiritual professionals. My son's father was a horrible alcoholic. He'd disappear for days at a time. I can't tell you how many times I was told to stick it out just because we had a child together. My 8th grade teacher told us when we got to college to not go to class because the professors like and respect you more if you skip class to figure out the material on your own. I'm glad I didn't listen to that advice. A Christian friend explained that God wanted me to stay a virgin until marriage, but doing it in the butt was totally okay. Apparently, the Lord is very concerned about the intactness of one part of my hoo-ha, but is totally cool with me taking it in the pooper. Go to ITT Tech. It's great. I got so close to doing that, and I'm so glad that I didn't. It was ridiculously expensive and the degree is worthless, but they make it so easy to get into the school and arrange financial aid and student loans. They have recruiters who are good at taking advantage of poor kids like I was. For anyone listening to this, do not do it. No for-profit school is worth it. ITT Tech, University of Phoenix, Devry, those ones. They're all essentially scams. Go to a local public community college or technical college instead. If you're in a bad financial situation, you can work out the same aid through them, but it will be far cheaper. I actually got paid to go to school in my case, and you'll get a degree that will actually get you a job, especially if it's a technical degree. Join the army, they said. See the world, they said. The day I realized I needed to stop taking career advice from my dad was when he said the following when I was about 17. Everyone goes into computers now. Too many people. All the people your brother's age went into computers at university, so there's no point in you doing it. You need to do something different if you want to find a job. I now live with a 29-year-old app developer who earns £45,000. It was terrible advice from a man who was too old to really understand that computers weren't just a fad. Here, take these naturopath salt tablets for your high blood pressure. You need a gaming computer? Get an Alienware. If the poop won't come out, just push and push as hard as you can until it does. Funny story, back in high school I used to wrestle. A common way to make weight, i.e. weigh under a certain amount to fight at that weight class, was to poop, an easy loss of 1 to 2 pounds. A friend of mine was half a pound overweight, so he went to unleash his bowels. A few minutes later, he came out of the bathroom, face beet red and toilet paper hanging out of his pants. During the process of defecating, he found himself constipated. Desperate to force it out, he pushed as hard as he could and ended up bursting several blood vessels in his butt. Blood everywhere. Needless to say, he didn't wrestle that day. This one friend of the family, his wife of more than 20 years, dies from cancer. Now, ex-sister-in-law practically berates him at the dinner table, telling him that now is not the time for being selfish and grieving, the way he wanted, which was moving in with the family to be supported until he got disability housing because he's blind. Nobody had a problem with this apart from his sister. I never wanted to smash someone's face into the dinner table so badly. What an absolute C-word. Here, take this homeopathic vaccine. It's better than the dangerous stuff your doctor wants to give you. When my dad was younger, his older sister had food poisoning, and from what I remember, it was pretty sudden and violent. They called the doctor, and I guess buying Ipecac would have taken too long or something, but he told my grandma to just keep making her eat raw eggs until she puked up what was making her feel ill. Also, my other grandma was told, even though she was not a smoker, to pick up smoking when she was pregnant with her second child, my mum, because her first one was a big baby and the smoking would make the next one attractively small. Svelte, if you will. Had a guy in welding class try to tell me it would be just fine if we connected the oxygen tank to the line that carried argon for TIG welding. A gas is a gas, this'll work just as good. I personally shudder to think about what might have happened if someone struck a welding arc in the presence of pure, extremely reactive oxygen. I mean, hell, the whole point of using argon is to shield your weld from oxygen contamination. Also, oxygen tanks typically have reverse threads to keep idiots like that guy from connecting them to the wrong gas line. Oh, nothing bad's gonna happen, just keep doing the deed with the toaster. Living with debt is okay, you never really have to pay it off. Thanks, fellow medical students. Yeah, everybody has a water buffalo. Load of bullcrap. Where's my water buffalo? The narrator wondered what piece of pop culture he was missing out on with this comment, so he googled it, and it appears that even in my mid-30s, with my Christian days well behind me, I can't escape from VeggieTales. Thank you, whoever submitted that. Abstinence-only education is effective. The owner of an outdoor summer camp I used to go to did a big lecture about sun protection at the beginning of each week. and always carefully explained that people with darker skin didn't need to wear any. In February 2011, I was denied a UK PSW visa after I completed my Master in Science. The problem was on my end, so I've got no one to blame. Essentially, I screwed up part of the maintenance section of the application. It wasn't that I didn't meet the qualifications, it was just that I filled out the section wrong. I was given a week's time to either leave the country or to appeal the decision. In that time, I spoke to a few immigration solicitors on the best course of action. The first solicitor I spoke with told me that I'd be stupid not to appeal, because that would extend my leave in the UK for as long as the appeal takes. He also said I was stupid to not hire a solicitor in the first place because I wouldn't be in this mess if I did. Then he told me that I was guaranteed to lose my appeal, but I should hire him anyway because at least he knows what he's doing. This would cost me £140 for the appeal and £1,500 for the hiring of this solicitor. No, thank you. Another solicitor I spoke with told me to go ahead with the appeal but to also submit a fresh application. His logic was this: by submitting an appeal, my leave to remain in the UK would be extended until the appeal took place, and because I did meet the qualifications, a new application would be accepted if I filled it in correctly this time around. This sounded like solid advice, so I researched the possibility of doing this. According to the UK BA, you are not allowed to do this. Your appeal and new application get thrown out, of course, after they process the £561 visa fee and the £140 appeal fee. I ended up submitting the appeal, but with advice like this, I could not in my right mind ever consider hiring a solicitor. I ended up representing myself in immigration court and I won my appeal. In short, my UK visa was denied, I ignored the advice of immigration solicitors, and won my appeal because I didn't listen to them. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Johnnies don't work against human immunodeficiency virus. I heard this from a generally intelligent, albeit very Christian young lady doing outreach work with inner-city teens. I had to sit her down for a talk. The last thing those kids need is one more person reinforcing the idea that since Johnnies don't always work, there's no point in using them. Everything will work itself out. No, it frickin' doesn't. I fix everything, and then they say, "See, it all worked out." I'm so sick of hearing that. Wait until you're married. Is the whole no doing the deed before marriage a typical or common American thing? Because I've never once heard anyone give that advice to anyone in the UK. The closest thing I've heard is make sure you're safe, but of course that's actually good advice. Canadian here, my mother's family are very religious, small-town people. I've got a few cousins who got married right out of high school, mostly because they wanted to do the deed with each other, but they're taught that it was wrong to do that before they were married. Okay, now double-click on Internet Explorer. Every time I hear a parent tell me they won't vaccinate their kid because it'll make them autistic, I want to strangle them. I don't want to catch some medieval plague just because they're stupid enough to believe everything they hear or read. Do some research, people. Vaccines may cause some complications in very few people, but the benefits they provide, specifically in preventing global pandemics, far outweigh the risks. Every rose has its thorn. Actually, there are several varieties of thornless roses, just as there are plenty of cowboys who don't even sing. Many years ago, I lived in California and was getting a divorce, during a time this state had decided to add mandatory counseling because of the high divorce rates. So I was waiting, and I can hear everything that's being said by the person in the counseling booth. The woman is crying and saying that her husband has been drinking and making her life miserable since his release from jail. The counselor's response? Listen, you can either break up your family or accept him the way he is. Worst advice ever. Not too bad or anything, but there's a bus route that recently got combined into another route. The 510 no longer comes around, it's only the 509 now. This lady gets on the bus and asks if the 59 goes on the same route as the 510. The bus driver says, "Sort of," and leaves it at that. The lady asks again, "Where does this bus go?" The driver says, "Where do you want to go?" "I don't know, I just know it's on the 510 line." He looks at her blankly. She then says, "Never mind, I'll just wait for the 510. Okay, you do that. I felt bad for the lady because she left before I could even speak up. The stupid bus driver made her wait in the rain for a bus that would never come. I mean, sure, she was a bit lost and she should know where she's trying to go, but that bus driver was the worst. Go scatter your loved one's ashes wherever. I'm now a funeral director, and there's a huge list of places where it's illegal to scatter them. Most state parks, for example. Families can get fined huge amounts. Cremated remains have no nutritional value and can actually smother plant life in amounts larger than a scattering or dusting. Do not put them directly on your plant's soil. Opposites attract. What is true for magnets is not true for human beings. Also, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I think that's one of the worst pieces of advice that's commonly given to children throughout the lower levels of grade school. How can you tell a child this and then explain to him why using a racial slur is wrong or why bullying is wrong? Well, I agree with all of these points, in particular about how vocal discrimination and attacks aren't just something you should be expected to walk off. Although, in defense of that crappy sticks and stones saying, it's not as if it follows up with, so go out and insult people because it doesn't matter. The director of a charity bicycling organization to new riders said, "Don't worry about picking up biking gloves, you don't need them." In addition to protecting your hands in the case of a fall, which is only like 1% of their function, cycling gloves protect two nerves that run through your palms. Leaning on handlebars for long periods of time dulls these nerves, and that makes your hand numb and difficult to move. Particularly, it makes it hard to form a fist, which is how you frickin' brake on a bicycle and prevent huge accidents. Gosh darn it. The food pyramid is a total mess. No wonder there's an obesity crisis. You need to learn cursive. You'll use it for the rest of your life. Thanks, third grade teacher. Never change yourself for your boyfriend or girlfriend. If you're a crappy person and are hurting your significant other because of your crappy qualities, then it's always better to change. Also, sometimes small sacrifices are okay to be made if it means maintaining a happy relationship. I feel like part of the reason there's so many divorces is because everyone is being told not to change. You can take this, it's herbal, so it won't interact with any of your other medications. YOLO! But then again, not everyone believes in reincarnation like I do. iPhones don't use Flash, that's why they don't get viruses. You shouldn't even want to have a girlfriend until you're 22 years old, said my dad. My mum said I should wait until I was 23. Screw them both for making me feel crappy about talking to girls at 17. This crap. Yeah, I hate it. Being a girl, so many moms act like it's scandalous to have urges before then. Screw you for thinking there's something wrong with me because I started feeling funny down there when I was 13. That no one will love you unless you lose weight. Drop out now because you'll never amount to anything. Don't vaccinate your kids. That one really infuriates me. There's always money in the banana stand. I checked. Putting a spoon in the mouth of someone having a seizure. Don't do this, they'll choke on top of their other problems. Cleaning the aquarium out with soap and water. Think of the fish. Applying to law school. You can't OD on Tylenol. Lift with your back, put a real arch in it. You can put more weight on that way. Learning about Shakespeare's The Tempest for my English A-level, and we get to the mask section. The teacher says, "I'll give you a brief overview because it's not that important and they never ask you about it in the exam." Exam day arrives, the teacher says, "Okay everyone, turn over your paper, your time starts now." 50 pupils open to a 15 marker on the significance of the mask in the play. This wasn't life-changing, but it was entertaining. I was good friends with an Asian exchange student in high school. We had to do a presentation for class, and he wrote some story about dragons, but didn't know the word for dragon. I told him it was master, and then the word for alternatively rooster or a gentleman's downstairs organ. So he went to the front of the class and did a presentation in broken English, saying a rude word about 25 times. It might sound mean, but we were good friends, and these were the sort of things we did to each other. I went to a private Christian high school. In 9th grade, in lieu of life skills classes, we were required to attend a week-long abstinence seminar. During this week, we heard many outrageous lies, but the worst of all was Todd Atkins' little factoid about the female body not being able to get pregnant in the instance of the unspeakable act. Specifically, we were told that the human body releases a fear hormone that acts as a shield around the unfertilized egg. I remember most of my classmates believing this completely, as did the adults who were teaching it to us. So remember, ladies, if you got pregnant as a result of the unspeakable act, it's probably because you actually liked it. I know a guy who thought that if he drank enough Mountain Dew, it would sterilize his little swimmers so he could go without protection. My uncle was also in the Navy, and whenever he and his shipmates would make it to port, they'd briefly walk in front of the radar to sterilize themselves for several days. This was from my dad, the truck driver. Why are you going to college for engineering? You'll never have a pension. Just go get yourself a good union job. Surely the Conservatives can't be any worse than the New Labour. Overheard while working in a restaurant, go get a pan of water to put out that grease fire. I mean, this is terrible advice, but let's be honest. The fact that you can't put out a grease fire with water is a fact that probably just escapes a lot of people. It's one of those bits of common knowledge that barely qualifies as such. I once worked in a nursing home and overheard two black nurses berate this really nice black guy, also a nurse who was from Ethiopia, about not acting black American black. In my opinion, it was the man's sincerity and kind ways that made people like him so much. It made me kind of sick that they were trying to basically poison him against others. After having to cancel a job interview because of a rather severe family emergency, my father-in-law told me to next time just take my 3 children with me to the interviews. This would be bad enough without the added fact that my middle child has social difficulties and needs constant supervision. Don't unit test, it's stupid and you don't gain anything, said one junior to another. I overheard this over my headphones and music. There was a man in Glasgow, Scotland who'd been repeatedly shanked and was bleeding to death. His family didn't know what to do, but they'd heard of the phrase to rub salt in the wounds, so that's what they did. He died in agony. Horrifyingly wrong advice. Children can't grow to be healthy, happy, successful, reasonable people unless they're raised by both a heterosexual father and a heterosexual mother. If you climax while she's on top, she can't get pregnant, because gravity. I'm not sure how true this is, but an acquaintance of mine said her doctor told her to keep smoking throughout her pregnancy, or the baby risks going through nicotine withdrawal when it's born. I don't know a lot about babies, but it sounded like she just wanted an excuse to keep smoking. Fundy in my freshman year geology class told the class that erosion isn't real. Last year I had a gay roommate. During the year, I was having some girl problems and talking to a friend about it, and she said, "It's because your roommate's gay. You need to spend some time with manly men so you'll be interested in girls again." Never give up on someone you can't go a day without thinking about. That made a bad breakup worse because he held on to it for way too long. The physician who diagnosed me as being diabetic told me to just get more exercise and avoid sweets. I was already physically fit and an avid mountain bike rider. No advice to get AmITheA or see an endocrinologist, which I later did on my own. The specialist, of course, helped me create a sensible management plan. By the way, of the dozen diabetics I've known in my life, 11 were like me, not obese. Just saying because people tend to think diabetes is always the fault of the person who has it. Which animals are the biggest jerks in the zoo, and what do they do? Cassowaries. If anyone needed to go into their enclosure, there had to be 2 others in riot gear. Nothing makes you crap your pants more than scrambling behind those guys and hearing the karate kick of the gods smash a riot shield behind you. Aldabra tortoises. They have an outdoor pen, but obviously they're stuck in a smaller indoor enclosure during the colder months. They won't leave you the F alone. I was watering the plants at one point when 2 big males snuck up behind me and pinned me to the wall. I pinwheeled my arms and fell onto one's back and sort of got to ride him. Other times, they decide to sit right in front of the door, so you're stuck until you convince them to move. You certainly aren't going to move 500 pounds of turtle on your own. If you put a squeegee against the wall, they simply have to knock it over and sit on it. You got the hose out? Yep, they've got to sit on that too. Bringing out food? They'll sit right in the frickin' feed troughs. There's a teaching zoo near where I live, and a few years ago they had to evacuate due to a wildfire. Afterwards, the local paper did a piece on it and they interviewed the people who had to evacuate the animals. They have lions, water buffalo, cougars, hyenas, all kinds of large animals. Which one was the hardest to evacuate? The Galapagos tortoise. He's enormous, bad-tempered, and much more difficult to train than most of the other animals. Getting him out of his enclosure and onto a truck was apparently quite the challenge, especially given the short time frame they had for evacuation. I wasn't there at the time this happened, but I used to volunteer at the Omaha Zoo, and there was the story of Fu Manchu the orangutan. Apparently, one of the keepers found Fu and some of his buddies hanging out outside of their enclosure and ushered them back in. When it happened again, the keeper thought that someone was leaving the enclosure open. It happened so much that someone was about to get fired over it. Finally, someone witnessed Fu climbing through an air vent to get to the door, pulling it open enough to expose a gap, and then pulling a piece of wire from his mouth and using the wire to undo the latch and open the door. He had been hiding the wire in between his gums and lips to engineer his escape. It was only a jerk move because he almost got people fired. Otherwise, it was slick as hell. I grew up in St. Louis and went to the zoo a lot when I was a kid. Once I watched 3 jerky kids throwing stuff at a hippo. I was furious, but just stood there because I didn't want to get beat up. And I swear to God, that hippo turned slowly, backed up as close as possible to the moat, and then targeted these kids with a spray of hippo diarrhea in a flow that was truly unbelievable in volume and accuracy. Well, I would say in this one particular instance, the hippos aren't being massive hyper-aggressive jerks. What were those kids thinking? Doesn't everyone know that they're at the top of the list of animals you don't want to mess with? A fate well deserved from them, at least. We had a kookaburra who'd catch lizards, snakes, frogs, and even earthworms so that he could feed them to you. You'd be standing around doing your job, and all of a sudden he'd show up on your shoulder trying to force-feed you a lizard he'd whacked on the ground 30 times. Oh, and by the way, if you covered your mouth, why not try the ear? The ear is a great place to put a dead lizard or live earthworm, apparently. Ah, mate, you're not wrong. I nursed a cookie chick I found when I was still in high school, and once she had matured, she basically became my self-appointed nursemaid. We called her Mon, short for monster, Cookie Monster, get it? And she'd sit outside my window at times when even the sun would be telling you to F off and get back to bed, and subtly smash a snake or lizard or whatever she'd decided to murder on my windowsill until I was awake and had let her in. Then came the struggle to identify what she had in her frickin' beak. If it was still alive, that is, and how to make sure she didn't touch its mangled body to my face. On a couple of occasions, she'd been fooled by something playing dead and let it loose on my bed. Not so great when it's a real angry carpet python who then proceeds to musk crap all over your bed and try to bite your face off like it was your frickin' idea. But there were the times that were awesome, like going down to the Chapman River for a swim and having her follow and watch over me from a tree and just laugh her head off. Or when she'd just get in the house and basically have a screaming match with my dad, which she always won. Or when she'd chase my little sister around the table, by running on the floor, not flying, like it was amusing her, whenever my sister tried to eat brekkie at the same table as me. That bird always had a way to put a smile on my dial, and I missed her something terrible when she finally never came home one morning. I still get all bittersweet when I hear one of them cacking itself. I work with squirrel monkeys, and I go in there with a little bowl of live mealworms for training purposes. One day, one particular monkey was being fairly grabby, reaching for my hair and whatnot. I'd closed up to their cage and was getting ready to leave when I noticed I hadn't slid a hatch shut. I moved closer to the fence to do it, and someone, I don't know who, but I'm betting it was the grabby one, shot a hand out of the cage reaching for the mealworms and knocked the bowl out of my hands. I don't know if you know this, but individual mealworms are hard to pick up off the floor, especially when they're crawling away as fast as their little legs can go. And so then, of course, all the monkeys are on the ground reaching through the fence to grab the little worms while I'm trying to scoop them back into the bowl as fast as I can. That must have been the greatest thing ever to them, like, holy crap, free worms everywhere! I did also have a capuchin monkey throw food at me. I ignored it because I was observing a different monkey at the time, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw the one that I assume threw the food come up to the fence and stick her arm under the door to try and reclaim the food she'd thrown at me. But it was out of her reach. Karma. One time at Busch Gardens, I noticed that the then 2 female orangutans had acquired some materials, several sticks and some t-shirts. I imagine the shirts were for enrichment or something. Anyway, these 2 ladies had torn the t-shirts into approximately inch-wide strips and were clearly assembling a raft design with the sticks. See, their enclosure was surrounded by a moat, and I think they'd figured out this was their best shot at making a break for it. Meanwhile, the male orangutan had taken another t-shirt and just put his head through the neck hole. He hadn't put the t-shirt on, instead he draped it over his head and he'd lift up the bottom hem and play peekaboo with the tourists. I'm sure there are problem animals in other areas of my zoo as well, but the animal that's the biggest jerk that I've worked with takes the form of a baby camel. Now, most children don't think about camels as dangerous animals, but usually, after a quick Google search, it'll show you plenty of videos displaying just how strong and terrifying they can be. Fortunately, that's not an issue for us. All of our camels are well trained and pretty well behaved, so long as you don't leave anything sitting around them that you aren't prepared to have eaten by one of the giant lugs, except for this one camel. This baby camel was orphaned by her mother, so she's been raised by us for the most part. Usually, she's pretty sweet and fairly easy to get along with, but I've never seen an animal go through bigger mood swings than her. One moment she'll be rubbing up next to you looking for attention, but the next moment you have your back turned, she'll be half reared up and ready to kick. Then after failing to murder you, she'll try to come back to you for more affection like none of this ever happened. She'd use any reason as an excuse to try and attack one of us too. Oh, that stick that's been in my enclosure for a week and I've never reacted to? Now that you're in my enclosure as well, it's now clearly an attacker and I need to destroy everything in my immediate radius. Now I know what you're thinking, it's just a baby, right? What harm could she possibly do? Well, by 6 months she was already past 200 pounds and still growing. She'll easily pass 1,000 pounds when she's fully grown. So trying to lead her outside in the morning when she was in a homicidal mood was a hassle to say the least, dodging kicks and trying to hold on to her lead while she did her best to murder you. I'd easily say 90% of the injuries sustained on the job in our department were due to her. That being said, I still love the little Antichrist, and she's definitely started to calm down with age and take her training a bit better, but that couldn't come fast enough for most of our shins and ankles. Yep, camels are up there with hippos for me in the list of animals that I am not at all prepared to mess with. I've never met someone who's ridden one who didn't have a story about them being spitty, bitey, and bad-tempered. Do better, camels. I used to volunteer at a zoo, and the biggest jerk were the ravens. They were really smart and awesome for enrichment activities and for teaching classrooms, but if they got bored, they'd find a way to entertain themselves. One particular time, a raven decided to place some of its food right outside its caged enclosure to lure a peacock, and once the peacock got close and started to eat, the raven would sneak up and pluck the tail feathers off the peacock. I interned my senior year of undergrad at a zoo and I loved it. I wish I'd stuck with it. Here are the animals that I worked with. Snow leopards. The mom and dad were big jerks. Wouldn't actively attack or anything, but they just didn't want any interaction with us. We had a cub born the day before I started, so I got to help raise this little jerk. We tried to be as hands-on as possible when we weighed her every week, but that little cub was mean. I have scars from her, but it's a pretty cool story to say you have scars from a snow leopard. Papa leopard almost knocked me out once. I got close to the fence to look for him. The fence was kind of that loose chain-link mesh steel, so it moved if you leaned on it. I went to look for him because we were trying to shift him inside for the evening. I lean on the fence and he comes out of nowhere and pounces on the fence right above my head, then trots inside. I don't think he was trying to eat me, just knock me on my butt. Then of course there are all the monkey jerks. Hanuman langurs. They are the worst. We had a mum and a daughter and they hated anything that was male, which I happened to be. I cleaned up their poo and fed them, but they still hissed and yelled at me. Francois Langur. This little guy was way cooler than his roommates. He had a faux hawk and knew where treats were kept in my pockets. He'd give you a pat down if you came by to visit. And the red pandas, the sweetest little things. They're basically slow and clumsy raccoons. They'd do anything for a grape or biscuit. And finally, the cougars, my favorite by far. These were the two cuddliest giants I've ever seen. One was like 100 pounds, and the other had a weight problem and was easily 200. The smaller one was a female, and I would have felt very comfortable if there was ever a reason I'd be locked in her cage alone. The big guy was very sweet as well, but I feel like instinct may kick in with him sometimes. They both loved scratches on their head and cheeks, and they'd purr. They were humongous house cats, basically. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I've visited a popular wildlife rehabilitation center in South Africa called Maholoholo. I know, right? It's a great name. About 7 or 8 times. They have at the center arguably the world's most famous honey badger called Stoffel. Now, I'm sure none of you need an introduction to how frickin' savage these animals are, but this particular jerk has actually featured on multiple TV shows because of his antics. In the first few years of his life at the center, he dug his way into the lion enclosure twice and attacked the alpha male of the pride both times. How did he live through this, you ask? So the honey badger actually has this incredible survival mechanism. Their skin is really tough and really loose. When the lion clamped his jaws around Stoffel, he was actually able to rotate his skeleton within the skin and turn around to bite the lion on the nose. After the lion dropped him, Stoffel continued to terrorize the pride, but none of them wanted to be anywhere near him. I think eventually they had to tranquilize Stoffel so they could treat his wounds. When he kept digging his way under the wall of his enclosure, it had to be rebuilt 2 meters deeper into the soil. When he opened up cracks in the concrete and escaped, those had to be covered with metal sheets. When he used rocks and sticks to create a tower and climb over the wall, they removed them, only for him to steal a zookeeper's broom and climb out using that. He terrorized one of the staff regularly. The best was when Brian said he woke up to Stoffel's scraping at the door, so he grabbed a 10,000-volt stun gun from his cupboard and zapped the honey badger little jerk with it. Stoffel didn't move, didn't even flinch. Brian says he just got angrier and started growling. Brian had to climb out the window and lock all the doors while they worked out what to do about Stoffel. I know many more stories of his antics, but my favorite is how, after years of living on his own, they decided to find him a female companion to join him in the enclosure. And the first thing Stoffel did with his new wife, stood on her head and used her to climb over that wall again. Our local zoo used to have peacocks walking around freely. Those little jerks hated people, chased lots of small children before they got kicked out finally. Ex-zookeeper here, orangutans are super smart, super strong, and super jerks. Well, some are. We had a female who, if you were standing in front of her indoor enclosure, would spit and hit you in the mouth every damn time. And she'd smile. She grinned so big when it happened. Lesson learned. I've been behind the scenes at a zoo once in my life. It was while they were feeding the monkeys or primates or whatever the proper term is. An orangutan with a mouthful of fruit looked at me, sighted in, and launched a golf ball-sized wad of spit and fruit at me. Hit me straight in the mouth. As gross as it was one hell of a shot. Well, I believe that's the 4th orangutan story in this video, meaning that there are frontrunners just for sheer quantity of stories. Although, to be fair, most of theirs are just them playing mean pranks, not the eviscerate-y, scary stuff that the big cats and birds seem to get up to. A wallaby named Wallace Montgomery. He was hand-raised, translation a frickin' psycho, and then given to us when he became a wee bit overwhelming for his previous caretaker. Feeding time? Be prepared to be gouged by his razor-sharp nails, bit on your softest parts, and the bowl will be knocked out of your hands. Cleaning time? He'll grab your rake and shovel, hit you with them, and kick you when you try to bend down to pick up your stuff. Trying to give him fresh straw to sleep on? Nope. He shredded the bag it came in. He picked up the dirty, urine-filled straw and rubbed it all over you. I love him immensely, actually. Fun fact, if you pick him up mid-tantrum, he'll just lay his head on your shoulder and give you 3 solid minutes of snuggles before recommencing your attempted murder. When I worked as a zookeeper intern, I think the biggest jerks were the emus. It was the summer of 2004, and the emus shared an exhibit with the wallabies. The exhibit wasn't high security, it was essentially a fence made of dried bamboo stalks. Wallabies are super cute, and while we didn't have an area where they're in the same place as visitors, some zoos do. Wallabies are not typically threatening to visitors in any way. The emus, though, were big jerks. They constantly pecked at the wallabies and were generally a pain in the butt. They weren't separated because they didn't cause actual injuries. The wallabies eventually got their revenge and freedom, though. One night, one of the emus ran into the fence and sort of gently impaled itself. It wasn't badly injured, but it did fall down after the injury. So what did the wallabies do? They kicked it in the head until it was dead. The wallabies and emus were separated the next day. As a side note, zebras are jerks too. Our zebras shared an exhibit with the giraffes. We had a giraffe platform where visitors could feed the giraffes carrots, grain, and other goodies, according to the giraffe diet, of course. The zebras wanted the goodies and would kick the giraffes in the leg so the giraffes would drop their food. Then the zebras would eat it. Not quite the same thing, but I volunteered at an aquarium while in high school. I later worked at another aquarium, but that's beside the point. I used to talk at different exhibits. The worst was beluga whales, at least they were for me. It's the first stop and lots of people come, and I was just too anxious to go on mic in front of that many people. One of our whales was a young male. He interacted with the guests the most, often pushing his melon against a glass and blowing out water. There are videos of him with a mariachi band and at weddings during ceremonies. So yeah, a young male whale. Young male whales are excitable, if you catch my drift. Sometimes he'd get so excited, he would rub himself on the biggest piece of glass. He only seemed to do this on the busiest days or when we had lots of kids. Normally, I'd talk about other stuff and people just kind of pointed and laughed. Some people would ask what was happening, to which I'd reply, "Oh, you know how these young guys are," and people usually got it after that. One day, on a super busy day, the whale rubbed himself until he finished. Whale splooge for everyone to see. I was barely 16 at the time, and I was mortified when kids ran up to ask me what that explosion was. The whale just swims away, that smug jerk that he was. Oh, this one frickin' octopus. I was volunteering at an aquarium in the cephalopod section. One day the power was out, so we were on backup generators and we were running all over to make sure everything necessary to keep the animals alive was still running. The tanks where we kept the giant Pacific octopuses, these things are about 8 or 9 feet across, didn't have a solid top to close it up. Instead, the top portion of the tank is covered by astroturf. Octopus suckers can't work on astroturf, so they can't climb out. In theory, this witch jams herself into the water outtakes in her tank while no one is paying attention. Water keeps going in, but none can get out. She makes a frickin' waterfall out of the tank and tries to ride it to freedom. We caught her just after she flopped onto the floor. They're just too frickin' smart. Swans are pure devil spawn. They want to kill anything that moves near them. Sweet harmless baby ducks born in the pond? Initiate murder instinct. Man who feeds me and cleans my awful poo-poo every day? Start up the murder protocol. Even the dumbest of invertebrates know that we fed them and would be kinder. Swans see you bringing them out food from across the park and are furious that, "You stole my food I never had and put it in that bucket you're bringing toward me, and I'm going to beat the crap out of this groundhog near me because of it and then try to murder you." Swans are the worst. Imprinted raptors will try to mate with your head if you're not careful. This is especially problematic when you're dealing with large birds like eagles. Fortunately, the largest bird that's attempted this with me is a Mississippi kite, so I'm safe for now. Yeah, the narrator is fine in theory with most birds, but there's no denying that those guys do not think the same way that mammals do. I find pet birds very unnerving as they can be bitey, and then apparently, when they're not chomping at you, they're trying to couple with your head. Right now, my arch-nemesis is the short-tailed, leaf-nosed fruit bat. I'm an intern in a well-known zoo. We have a wet cave filled with about 1,000 of these little jerks. The door is surrounded by a wire cage. When we go to feed them, we just let the door open and let the bats fly into the cage. When we leave, we have to herd them into the cave. As an intern, I'm not allowed to touch them, so I put my hand up by them to guide them in. Except they don't like that and they'll fly right into my face and hover there for a few minutes. One day I was doing it by myself, and one of those little monsters would not get in the damn cave. I stood there for like 10 minutes doing jazz fingers, and he just hung in front of my face. Jerk. Monkeys. Definitely the monkeys. They're cunning, fast, and incredibly strong for their size, and they will find any opportunity to mess with you. Ironically, we had an enormous tiger that had been part of a circus, and while it weighed a couple of 100 pounds and could have just killed you with a swat of its paw, really it just wanted to be petted. It was more likely you would be crushed when it pushed its head against you for a good scruffing. I work with chimpanzees, and I'll tell you, when the girls are in estrus, which is kind of like being in heat for dogs, they are just downright mean to the males of their troops, sometimes even going as far as taking prized food items right out of the mouths of some of the lower-ranking males. I've also seen fights between chimpanzees, which is kinda normal as aggression is central to their social hierarchies, but the fights finally die down and everyone's making up with one another as they usually do, until one of the females, who wasn't done arguing, hands one of the males a rock to throw at another female who she was still mad at. This of course led to the fight starting all over again. I've worked in various wildlife rehab or research facilities, including a bird sanctuary where we did mist netting, which is setting up very fine nets between trees to catch songbirds, and banding of wild birds for research or population counts. I handled everything from thrushes to woodpeckers to crows to sparrows, and you know who the biggest jerks were? Fricking chickadees. Most of the birds were scared or curious when we took them out of the nets, but the chickadees? They were mad. There was something bizarrely respectable about it. Here I am holding a bird smaller than the palm of my hand whose head I could crush with my frickin' thumb, and it's going, "You may be bigger than me, but if you don't let go of me, I'll rip your frickin' cuticle off." As an aside, the woman who owned and ran one of these rehabs where I worked had rescued and cared for wolves, bears, lynx, mountain lions. The one animal that put her in the frickin' hospital? It was a white-tailed deer. It gored the crap out of her. Oh, in the same facility, our female black bear loved rainy days. She'd wait until a school or tour group got up nice and close to her enclosure, then gave the wet ground an almighty whack with her front paw and sprayed the entire group with mud. She did that every damn time. When did you realize that your parents were master criminals? If we were at home and they yelled, "Pigs!" we were to hide behind the couch and be silent. If we were in the car and they yelled, "Pigs!" we had to lie down on the floor and not move a muscle. I was kidnapped in grade 3 by my dad's supplier. He held us for 2 days. We had no idea. My sister and I met him before, loads of times. When he showed up at school and said our parents were on vacation and to go with him, we did. They had soda and Oreos and a puppy and a Sega Genesis, and it was the best weekend of my life. I found out 20 years later when my mum was complaining about never having had a vacation in her life. I reminded her of that vacation and she said, "You idiot, you were kidnapped." Oh, cool. My blood father was a substance dealer and he often came home with some really nifty stuff. I later found out it was stuff he got from people who didn't have cash on them but still wanted to buy. I think the thing I feel most guilty about was a Game Boy Advance I was given that we'd either only have for a little while or have forever. And when he said that, it was usually forever. It had a heap of games with it, and I went through and started new games on all of them, erasing the existing save files. Well, he took that one back after a month, so I guess whoever it was paid up, and I feel really sorry for that kid. Mummy or Daddy had needed a fix and used their Game Boy Advance as collateral, and when they got it back, all of their saves were gone. I was only a kid at the time and didn't really know the context in which I was handed the thing, but I know it belonged to a kid since there were quite a few young child learning game cartridges alongside Mario and Pokemon. Not my parents, but a friend's dad gave us some solid advice that I always remembered. Remember, boys, don't break the law when you're breaking the law. It applies in so many ways. For example, don't run a stop sign when you're carrying in the car, or don't speed if your inspection is out of date, or don't get the police called for a noise complaint if you've had a beer while underage. He was a shady guy, but oddly wise in many ways. I mean, I knew it was illegal, but probably growing all of that green herb outside when I was a kid. Dad was going to die of cancer, so he wanted to leave us some money. It was like diet Breaking Bad. Well, there it is, probably the most wholesome thing we're going to hear about in this particular video. Strap in, folks, it's probably all repressed trauma from here on out. My mum and dad are trained artists, and they would frequently counterfeit things like parking permits, coupons, doctor's notes, among other stuff. It was wild. Ours made us blow into breathalyzers so they could drive. My mum was the dealer. There are so many things I could list, but I'm on my phone, so just a few things off the top of my head. Smoking herb. When I was about 4, I chased my mum through the Woolworths pharmacy, shouting, "Mommy, Mommy, you dropped your special cigarette. Don't you want your special cigarette?" She hurried me out of there, shushing me, and I got a big talking to that afternoon. She also snorted white snow. I was in the 2nd grade when I got sent to the principal's office for teaching my friends how to make lines with salt and use part of a straw to snort it. My mum was real angry about that. We got told not to talk to cops or any straight people. I didn't know why at first, but I lived in terror of straight people. I got congratulations for making it through FBI questioning when I was probably 6 years old when they raided our land. SWAT teams are real scary. She taught me that bras and women's chests are great for smuggling. Cleaning out stems and seeds is a fun summer job. Don't say anyone's name on the phone. These are just a few things I can immediately recall. Oh, and I forgot to add how every now and then people in our circle of friends would move far away and change names, and we weren't ever allowed to call them by their old names. Mum also made us believe that morphine was an excellent pain reliever for almost anything. Which is true, but for a 6-year-old, maybe just a little Pamel or Tylenol for a headache is better. My dad was a tow truck driver, and he'd always bring me little presents as a kid that he got out of people's tow cars. As far as I knew, if someone knew their car was going to get towed, they took everything they wanted out of it, and the rest was fair game. Holy crap, same. My parents owned a repossession business when I was a kid. That's how I got my first computer. Someone had just left it in the car. Reading this thread makes me wonder about their business as a whole. My impression has always been that it was a legit business, but that my dad had just dodged taxes and eventually got caught. Now I'm thinking it's possible it was a front of some sort. My dad was investigated by the FBI for racketeering, but they were unable to press charges on him. He was also sued by a major financial entity for racketeering as well. Anyway, when I was a teenager, my dad had a lawsuit brought against him by multiple employees for unpaid overtime, and he ordered me to go through the boxes upstairs in a warehouse that would had to find all of their time cards. That storage area was a disaster. Papers everywhere. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find them, so I told my dad that it was no use, the time cards weren't there. My dad then yelled at me, telling me that he needed those time cards, and said that all of these people were trying to rip him off, so if I had to, just make up the time cards for them so that they were working 40 hours a week with no overtime, but don't bother telling him about what I did to get the time cards when I had them. I just had to have them for him one way or the other. I didn't think much about that last bit until I realized much later. But long story short, I ended up making time cards that he used for his case. He won. Realized several years later that my dad had used me for forgery, and when I confronted him about it, he just laughed and said that I was a minor at the time, and nobody puts a minor in jail for white-collar crime. I've run into some of those employees since then, and when they accosted me for being his daughter and how they'd want to punch my dad, or worse, if it was him they ran into, I've always confessed this to them. Ironically enough, they've all said that they'd punch him on my behalf too, because the fact that he used his own daughter annoyed them even more. And about the racketeering thing? He loved laughing about that and calling himself a don. When I was going to take over the business several years later, after the forgery bit, his oldest employees gave me loyalty oaths, and I ran like hell. My dad absolutely was a racketeer. My boyfriend always talks about the stories of his dad having friends everywhere. Family would talk about how his now late father had friends no matter where he went in the city, and how great that was. And no matter where they stopped, he'd randomly know someone there. Then, as an adult, he realized that his dad just had dealers everywhere, and that's who he was always seeing. Oh, my mum. Shoplifting for the most part. I mean, like, she never made us do it, but she didn't hide what she was doing either. She's the reason model homes have cameras now. My dad stole a few things in a sneaky way so my brother and I would have one each. In one instance, for example, he bought a Game Boy game. He brought it back to the car, removed the cartridge, and took it back into the store saying the case was empty. He did the same thing with those Pikachu Tamagotchi things. I think his biggest steal was a PlayStation 2. He actually did pre-purchase one. My mum went in and picked it up, but when leaving the store, the door person didn't tear the receipt. So, my dad took the receipt back in, picked up another PS2, stuck the receipt on it, and walked out. The door person tore the receipt this time, but obviously didn't pay attention to the time of sale. Dad also ran a huge, quote, business of installing chips in PlayStations so that they could play copied games. He'd rent games, burn a copy, then sell copies to other people. We had a whole library and catalogue of copied games, and Dad had quite a few customers. Looking back, I see how dodgy it was and why he told me not to tell too many people about it. My mum was put on house arrest for substance charges, had an ankle bracelet and a breathalyzer device that would go off at random times of the day to make sure she wasn't drinking. We had to have a whole separate landline for this purpose. As she got further into her house arrest, she'd start to really try to pull sly crap and take gambles on when her random screenings would be. She'd make me take the breathalyzers, and I think once or twice she even had me pee into a cigar case that she was planning on stuffing up her you-know-what to fudge the test. My memory is pretty hazy. The irony of all of this is that she got nabbed for failing a substance test, claiming that it was after getting Novocaine at the dentist's office. This was like 20 years ago, so I don't know if that was possible back then. If it was true, then it's hilarious because she felt like she didn't deserve to get caught, completely ignoring the fact that she did deserve to get all the other times she pulled her shady tricks. You know, it took me a long time to get over my confusion that not everyone at my school knew all of the police officers by name during the DARE program. It was a small town. Not because someone in my family was a cop, but because I thought they just showed up at everyone's houses all the time, just like me. It's funny how we assume everyone lives similar lives when we're kids. Oh. Aside from all the really dark and permanently affecting implications of the stuff we're getting here, there's something so very cute and pure about this one, in a heartbreaking way. I thought the cops came and looked at everyone's house from time to time. Doesn't Officer Brian make sure your room is tidy too? My family did a lot of petty, trashy crime, like shoplifting, theft, muggings, substances, among other stuff. I thought it was normal for adults to just kind of go to jail every few years for a day or two, until I was 10. Now, my stepdad is out of my life, and my mum is too old or ill to do anything particularly bad. But my dad may have helped finance a district attorney's election, which has saved him mountains in legal fees for himself and the working girls he frequents. I don't know and probably never will know what my parents did. However, we'd leave the house at nighttime and go drive through certain parks. Occasionally, my parents would panic and tell us to hide. We had to crawl onto the floorboards in the back of a tiny Buick. My dad came home with injuries sometimes, and my mum always said he fell. And finally, in that particular town, they hated the cops. They claimed they were all corrupt, and maybe they were. I don't know. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My parents would often get me to answer the phone as a young kid, like 4 or 5 and older. Anyways, the people on the phone always asked if Jones Mollusk was there. My parents would coach me to say, "No, Jones Mollusk lives here. I don't know who that is." Well, as a kid, I really didn't have a clue who Jones Mollusk was because my dad was always just Dad or went by his nickname. I didn't click for years that that was actually his name. I guess I helped my parents evade a few debt collectors and God knows what else. Also, me and my sister used to go play Barbies in Daddy's clubhouse. It was our favorite place. Dad built it himself in our backyard, and they even had a big bar and pool table. They bought a velvet couch for me and my sister to play on while Dad played pool and visited with all of my uncles. Dad always called it his clubhouse, too. So when people asked where my dad was, I'd say Dad was probably in his clubhouse. To which my mum would always get so mad at me and I'd be so confused, because that's what Dad said, and everyone else called it that too, but I wasn't supposed to talk about it apparently. Yeah, so my dad was in a biker gang. And let's see, there's probably some more stories from his wacky life. When he took us places like the aquarium or amusement parks, he always used to try and get us in cheaper. Well, one thing about me was that I was always a really oblivious child. This both helped and hurt him, such as those phone calls I talked about. I mean, I legitimately didn't know who Jones Mollusk was for years, guys. But in some cases, it also backfired. So once my dad was trying to get us into a park or something, and he lied about my age to get me in cheaper. Insulted immediately, I puffed up and said, "Dad, I am not 6, I'm 7. Cue the eyebrow raise of the attendant and my dad puffing back, "You're freaking 6. Good times. I can't remember if we got in cheaper or not. Probably not. He was so angry. Afterwards, he told me, "If I say you're 6, you're freaking 6. Eyes roll. Dads are weird, I thought. My dad also hated cops growing up. He used to call them effing pigs. He'd always made snide remarks about cops just eating donuts and generally being useless. He'd get stopped a lot by them. I guess they knew about him and his general associates. Anyways, one day we stopped at a Wendy's and Tim Hortons split restaurant. Now, if you don't know, sometimes restaurants share a building together, and in this case, we were only separated by a short wall to the other side of Tim's. We were waiting for our burger, and me being like 4 or 5 whatever, I was up on my knees looking over the partition. Well, there on the other side was a table full of cops. I remember feeling shocked and suddenly exclaiming very loudly, "Dad, you're right! All of those pigs do is eat donuts!" My mother was mortified and she pulled me down to sit. The cops all looked over, I guess, and started laughing, luckily. My dad thought it was hilarious. My dad was a mechanic. The things that stick out was when he had charged for a new replacement part and then go to the local junkyard and get the part from there instead. If the customer asked up front, he'd be honest and offer the 2 options. The junkyard part, which would be cheap but likely reliable, or a new expensive part with a warranty. If they didn't ask most of the time, it was a junkyard part. Rarely got in trouble or called out since his prices were just a fraction of regular shops. Oh, and I guess the other main shady part was that he wasn't a legit, certified mechanic and most business was cash or under the table. His apprentice is now my mechanic and he learned from my dad's mistakes. He provides receipts, boxes, and shows me where he installed the new part, and it's always shiny and new, minus obvious grease handling and installation marks. Substances. I had no idea they were illegal until I was a lot older than I should have been to understand they're illegal. My father was a grower and distributor to a well-known motorcycle club he was a part of. We grew up running around Mary J. Fields. I slept on a couch most of my childhood because all of the rooms had been converted into hydroponic setups. Our roof space was converted into storage where it was just garbage bags of the stuff, around 100 to 150 square meters, all stacked up on top of each other. And there was other stupid stuff too. Apparently owning unregistered weapons is illegal, and you need a driver's license to drive a vehicle. It was normal for people in my family to be in and out of jail. It was normal for most of them to have some sort of criminal record. We were always taught to not respect cops. For example, when my dad found green herb in my 16-year-old sister's car, Instead of reprimanding her for having it, he reprimanded her for how easy it would be for the cops to find it. We were always watching mob movies, and my dad would just gush about how classy and cool they were. It's just little stuff like that mostly, nothing super outrageous. I used to be told that everything was okay as long as you don't get caught. They kind of said it like a throwaway phrase, but I really took it to heart. It gave me a real lack of respect for any authority at all, and made it seem more like a game than real-life consequences. I'd do illegal stuff just to get the rush of wondering whether or not I'd be caught. Once I was caught, I'd just shrug and act like their winning didn't bother me. Kinda like their punishment was just them gloating about me getting caught. A family friend was in the import-export business for gemstones. I didn't realize it could be illegal to transport gems across international borders. We'd have gem parties where a dining table that can sit 12 would be completely covered in bowls of gems and jewelry to buy. Same as Tupperware parties, but for gems. Some stones my parents got appraised shocked their jeweler. Super rare colors of different stones that they'd never seen before. That one friend has gone legit and owns some mines in Africa now. Ugh. So legitimately probably the most evil person in this video. I can get being desperate or not being able to see another life for some of these people, but I'm willing to bet there were certainly conflict diamonds at that table, and that's a real conscious choice to invest in a human rights violation. I never knew we weren't allowed to drink at the local fair. Mum used to bring beer in a cooler when we went. I continued to not know until I was 21, and a cop stopped me when I was walking around with a beer in hand. Oh boy, this is bringing up very specific memories. My dad never said explicitly what he was doing was acceptable, but he certainly didn't tell me that this was wrong. Between the ages of 5 to 7, I'm not sure about the specific timeline on this, my mum was often working in the evenings while my dad was sporadically around. One night, while my mum was gone, Dad gathered me to go on an adventure. Usually this meant driving around the city and looking at stuff. Well, Dad pulls up to a hospital and parks. He sits with me in the car and gives me a script saying that we recently moved there. A lie. And that he'd hurt his back while moving boxes. A complete fabrication. I play along because, hey, it's my dad, and sure, whatever he says goes. Any other specifics from that night are pretty hazy. I think he managed to talk his way into some sort of painkiller prescription. This was in the early noughties, so opioids aren't as visible as now. My dad has been in successful treatment since then, but man, that's a big memory that stands out for how messed up my younger life was. My dad's no serious criminal, but petty in every way, including the crime he commits. I was basically taught to play dumb, act like you belong, and you can do whatever you want. We snuck into VIP lounges, other people's buffets and parties at restaurants and events. He once lied to a ticketer at a movie theater and got mad when they couldn't find the tickets he ordered online. He had not ordered tickets, but there was a huge line and he didn't want to wait. We got in for free and cut a huge line. Also cut lines at Disney World and other sorts of places. I'm now very embarrassed when he does things like this, and would never act this way myself. I think I might have always been uncomfortable with it, which is why I so detest it now. But it's something that's always in my mind, like some sort of dark superpower I might have. To use it, I just have to stop having self-respect. Quite a few things. As a bit of backstory, my biological father was convicted of murder, got away with another murder through claiming self-defense, I've got no clue if that was true, and apparently had a third murder that he never got caught for. He would steal constantly, from things from people to things inside of stores. One of my earliest memories is wanting this super cute pink hat. I believe I was around 8. He put it on my head and told me to just walk to the car. I remember asking about paying and he said, "Don't worry, just walk." So little old me walks to the outside doors with her heart pounding, and the alarm goes off. I freeze and run back to my dad that was still shopping. The first lesson I remember I learned? You just need to keep walking when those alarms go off. He died a few years back. My brothers and I are decent people. My brother is a great dad, despite the example set for him by his dad. I grew up in a relatively hostile environment. So many people come up so much worse, so I'm not really complaining. In mine, my mum had a bunch of boyfriends. Most were cool, some were garbage. Nice ladies came to talk to me at school sometimes, and after the first visit, my mum coached me pretty hard about what to say. She definitely taught me that beer was just soda that grown-ups drank that only tastes good when you're grown up. So, "he drinks a lot of soda" came up a few times. Again, really not that bad, but come on, Ma, what the frick? I have fond memories of hanging out in the shed with my parents, me playing with my dolls and them harvesting their money trees, green herb being strewn all over the floor and hanging from the ceiling, the leaves made into a little bed for my Barbie to sleep in. There were a lot of weird things I didn't think much of as a kid but realized were messed up as an adult. Like how our family moved 13 times in 15 years. I just assumed people got new houses all the time. And how sometimes I'd go to the freezer for some ice cream and find stacks of cash in the containers. Just weird stuff like that. My brother, who was much more than a decade older than me, was a substance dealer. A prominent one as well. He pretty much could get you anything. I've got fond memories of driving around at night with him, making stops to see his friends, and then him getting money. Sometimes clients would come to the house to pick up their stuff. I can remember getting bags of pills together. At the time, pills, specifically Oxy, were all the rage. He used to call himself a pharmacist. When we'd go out, you'd notice certain people would follow us. My brother would point them out. That's a detective, that's the DEA, etc. He died almost 10 years ago. I'm a professor who teaches criminology. Today, we're actually talking about substance trafficking, which naturally is my favorite crime and the one I've studied the most, from a young age. He had to weigh cash out on a scale so you don't actually have to count it. Taught me how to roll a wacky tobacco and how to use a gat. He gave me my first Xanax and my first beer. To be honest, he did the best for me with what he knew how to do. What was the craziest bachelor or bachelorette party you ever went to, and what happened at it? My grandfather used to tell a story about how he and his friends got the bachelor passed out and put him on a train. This would have been in Ohio in the 1930s. Apparently, the guy made it back for the wedding, but barely. At a friend's bachelorette party, mild fun and hilarity was had. Drinks, food, silly party games, the usual. The bachelor party was happening a few towns away, and the groom was staying in a hotel room overnight with a few of his college friends. His best man got him off his face and encouraged him to sleep with his ex, who had somehow been invited. He confesses it all to my friend the next morning. It was really awkward. The wedding was on, then off again, then on for a few days. They did end up getting hitched, but now they're divorced. I remember sitting there during the ceremony thinking, they won't last, and he confessed that he'd never actually been in love with her. Marriage just seemed like a good idea at the time. I climbed a medieval castle wall and found a load of reenactors camping inside. I announced I was taking the castle and tried to drunkenly fight a few knights. I was marched out the gate, my kingdom in ruins. With no siege engines or supply chain to speak of, your conquest was destined to fail. At least you fell in glorious combat rather than on the bathroom floor of some seedy motel. Up to this comment, I wondered if I should be one of those obnoxious girls who don't let their fiancé have bachelor parties, but the chance of this happening over the chance of him getting a transmissible disease from an exotic dancer might persuade me. My best man fell down some steps at an adult dance club and somehow got his foot stuck under something. Another groomsman helped him and broke his ankle in the process. It was black the next day and he was on crutches for the wedding 4 weeks later. My dad likes to tell the story of a bachelor party a friend of his had, where they liberated him of his clothes, then chained him to a tree in front of his in-laws to B's house and left him there. He had been passed out drunk, and the future in-laws got woken up by his horrified screaming at 6 a.m. The wedding still went off a few hours later. Depending on the in-laws and their expectations, I feel like this isn't necessarily a deal-breaker. It might be a matter of what country you're living in, but I feel like a lot of people would put it down to just lads being lads. Who knows? Although personally, I think people who have the party the night before are insane. Is that an American thing? Oh, my story happened to the mother of the groom at a wedding in West England in the 1980s. True story. The groom was to be taken to a pub the night before his wedding. Stag nights were much more local back then, and he got totally blitzed. His friends dragged him up the path unconscious to his house at 3 a.m., opened the front door with his key, and then dumped him on the front room sofa. One of his friends didn't think he looked quite right sprawled on his back on the sofa, so he went to the kitchen and found a sausage in the fridge. Returned to the living room, undid his friend's zip, inserted the sausage hanging out at the gap, and zipped up. They closed the curtains and disappeared into the night. In the morning, the groom's mum walked into the room, which was still dark, went to the window, threw open the curtains, turned around, and there was the family cat eating the sausage. Mother fainted, hit her head on a stone fireplace, and missed the wedding, and had to explain why there was a bandage on her head for the following week. The groom was never allowed to forget it. In the UK, they're known as stag do for the guys. One of my colleagues, quite a few years ago now, held his stag do the night before his wedding. Never a good idea, right? We hit a couple of pubs before going for a meal in a Chinese restaurant in Chinatown, London. Afterwards, we got into a nightclub off Leicester Square. Long story short, my colleague disappeared. Got to midnight and we couldn't find him. He wasn't in the club, nowhere around it, wasn't answering his phone. We gave up in the end and went home. Got to church next day and there's the bridesmaid and the best man turning people away. Our colleague had apparently chatted up a girl in the nightclub and gone back to her place. So I guess he went too far. He didn't return to work as his now ex-fiancée also worked with us in the same department. That's how they met. So at least he didn't make things difficult at work. A friend of mine once told me about a guy she knew who accidentally touched an exotic dancer's butthole at his bachelor party, ended up sleeping with her and later found out he'd contracted herpes. We were mostly caught up on how one accidentally touches someone's butthole. Oops, sorry ma'am, well, since we've already gone this far. A bachelor/bachelorette party seems much more fitting after a marriage or divorce than before. It's not me, but my cousin's husband went to Vegas for his party and of course cheated on her. She found out about that time and a few others. They're now divorced. Bottle thrown during a fight at an exotic dance club sliced the best man's face from right above the eye to below the left ear. He looked like a bloody mummy at the wedding. Not my story, but my friend's. Number 1. The bachelorette party was held out of town. The bachelor party was in town. Bachelor party concluded with everyone going back to the bachelor's little apartment to drink more. The bride got home from a nice weekend at the spa with her ladies to a totally trashed apartment. Holes in the wall, fridge pushed over and broken, cigarette holes in the couch, lots of broken plates and pictures, and the wedding was called off. The second, a cousin of the bride gets mad at the groom for some reason. She sends him a video she shot from the bachelorette party. It's a short video of the bride-to-be getting serviced by a gentleman in the washroom while laughing and throwing gang signs. The video ended when the fellow in question splooges in the bride-to-be and she yells, "Oh crap!" That wedding was called off too. For my group of friends, our bachelor parties have been a couple of weeks before our respective weddings and usually involve camping, breweries, firing weapons, and steakhouses. Never exotic dance clubs or anything sleazy. I don't really understand the rationale of going to be around those kinds of people or acting like a single guy looking for women. The rude part of me wants to say that it's only acceptable if you're trashy. The less rude part wants to say people justify it with, "You'll never get to do this again, try to enjoy it one last time," or, "If you go out and don't have a desire to try and get with any of these women, it means you're truly committed to your fiancé and ready to tie the knot." But honestly, that seems like a pretty ridiculous excuse to me. Former workmate was at one where they had a stag do in Spain. After a heavy day and night of drinking, upon getting back to the hotel, they got to daring each other to jump into the pool from their second-floor balcony. The groom-to-be completely messed it up and hit the edge of the pool with his head, breaking his neck. It didn't kill him, but now he has no feeling below his upper shoulders. Nice start to married life, making yourself a paraplegic. The exotic dancer wanted to spank the groom. The groom said no. The best man said no. Other groomsmen said no. She then said, "All right, well, I'm not going to kiss another woman." We'd hired 2 of them. "Until I spank someone." Well, I'm not letting that go, so I drop my pants and she says, "Let's go." She beat the crap out of my butt. I stood up involuntarily once, she hit me so hard. I had to hide the black and blues from the wife for a week. Funnily enough, it was the second time I've had it done. The first time, the lady in question was hitting my friend with a belt and he said stop. She grabbed me and told me to be a real man, and hit me. I said, "That all you got, you C-word?" And she loved that. And then she hit me right in that spot above your butthole but below your tailbone. Oof, I didn't sit right for a week. During my brother's bachelor party, we just planned on getting drunk and playing Time Crisis 3, but we ended up getting so wasted that we spent most of our tokens on Marvel vs. Capcom and Sunset Rovers. Wild night. This is realistically about as crazy a bachelor party as most of us will ever have, I feel, and you know what? Nothing wrong with that. I would rather a cozy night in with my best pals than waking up in the buck on a building roof next to a donkey, despite how good of a story that latter one seems. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Okay, so this one is a bit complicated. I'll do my best to explain everything so everyone can keep up. In college, I dated this girl. We'll call her Trish to protect the innocent or whatever. We were together for a few years and were truly in love. She and I ended up breaking up because I was stupid and she went off and joined the military. We stayed in touch and stayed very good friends, even as she moved to Germany with the US Air Force. In Germany, she meets a guy, they fall in love and decide to get married. He is from California, so they're going to have their wedding there. Trish's dad is a giant, crystal-loving piece of crap straight out of the armpit of Alabama. So seeing as she doesn't really have any family she wants at the wedding, aside from her younger sister, Trish asks me to walk her down the aisle. Of course, I agree to do it. So, I fly to California, ready to party. I meet the groom, meet his family, and get reintroduced to Trish's sister and settle in at my hotel. The bachelor party is that night, and I really have no idea what to expect. Remember, I've never met any of these people before, and the only person I know at the entire gathering is Trish and kind of her sister. We start the night at one of those indoor, high-speed go-kart places, taking breaks in between sessions to drink tequila in the parking lot. It's dangerous and stupid, but everyone's having a blast, apart from the 18-year-old boyfriend of the groom's sister. He started the night convinced he could keep up, but the tequila got the chunks blowing out of every hole in his face by the third round of parking lot shots. He stayed with us the whole night despite getting ill though, so credit to him for that. Next we went to a bar. I should say at this point that I was never a big drinker before all this, so I'm just kind of along for the ride with some seriously seasoned alcoholics. We got pretty hammered there before moving on to the Exotic Dance Club. This is a seriously nice place north of San Francisco. I can't remember the name, it's been years. And it's announced that the groom is getting married tomorrow and it's his last night of freedom, blah blah blah. Instant attention for the entire group of us, about 5. The groom and the best man had set aside some serious cash for this, so there's lots of trips to the champagne room, including the one where we all get downstairs kisses from one of the nice paid ladies. There may be no full-body adult fun in the champagne room, but there is definitely mouth-to-eggplant action, Chris Rock. The night ends with us closing down the Exotic Dance Club, all of us hammered. The best man, who's a beefy military dude, sees the bouncer has a taser on his belt, and he wants to see if he can take a taser shot, but the bouncer refuses to do it. Instead, he volunteers that one of this guy's friends, us, can tase him, but the bouncer can't for liability reasons. I was hammered, and despite only knowing these guys for a few hours, I grab the taser and blast this guy in the ribs with it. Surprisingly, or maybe due to his drunkenness, he can take a taser shot. Cheers from all of us, all the tired dancers and bouncers and riffraff at the club at 4 in the morning. I was astonished and just happy I hadn't accidentally killed the person I'd just met. Everyone heads out and I ended up back at my hotel around 5 a.m. I needed to be at the wedding at 10 a.m. and I was jet-lagged from flying in from the East Coast anyway. I make it to the wedding just fine, not even hungover or anything. But wait, there's more. The wedding morning goes smoothly, aside from the best man looking rather worse for wear from his hangover and taser shot, the taser shot that he can't remember taking, but has a burn mark on his chest for some reason. As I was walking Trish down the aisle, she leans in and says, "If this doesn't work out, I can always call you, right?" I'm shocked, but I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. The rest of the wedding goes smoothly, it's really fun, and the newly married couple is really happy despite what Trish had to say to me during her last seconds of being single. I mentioned these people were seasoned drinkers, and the after-wedding party goes absolutely bonkers. Everyone is frickin' plastered again, and with the bride and her sister being the only people I really knew, I ended up hanging out with her sister for most of the night. Trish was more than a little busy, it being her wedding night and having the entire party centered around her after all. Well, Trish sees me and her sister getting along so well and asks me a favor. I have a hotel with 2 twin beds. Can I take the sister off her hands so her and her new husband can have their first night as a married couple without her around? Sure, absolutely. Well, long story short, it seems the sister had always had a crush on me and we end up doing the deed in my hotel that night. The next morning rolls around and Trish and her new husband come to the hotel to pick her up. I answer the door in a state of semi-undress and Trish knows immediately what went on. She flips right the F out. The rest of that weekend was awkward as all hell. The groom's family and friends all hate me, and now the sister is seriously pining after me like I should have expected. It's a disaster. But I fly home, a good time had, and I just chalk it up to another friendship ruined over something dumb I did. I end up staying in touch with Trish despite her wanting to murder me. A few years went by and things were back to normal, so when her husband has to visit my city on business, I invite the 2 of them to stay with me for the night. They come, meet my girlfriend, hang out, get drunk, and they generally have a nice time. They leave the next morning and all seems back to the way it was before the wedding. 6 months later, Trish wants to come visit me again, alone this time. Her husband is out on military business for an extended period and she doesn't want to sit around Germany by herself for a month. So she wants to come and visit me for a week or so. Great! She comes along and it's just like it was in college. Best friends hanging out, but with the boyfriend, girlfriend, and doing the deed part out of the question. The night before she was about to leave, we were just watching TV, and she starts sobbing. Her marriage is falling apart, her husband is a jerk, she hates her life, and she wants to stay with me. She flies back to Germany the next day. She waits for her husband to come back from his business trip and informs him that she's leaving permanently and going back to the States. I find out about all of this about a week before she's scheduled to fly into my city, with whatever belongings she has in tow. He was supposed to mail the rest of her stuff, but he never did in the end. Originally, she was going to stay with family while she figured things out, but I invite her to stay with me. We end up falling back into old habits the night she gets back, and having amazing bedroom fun times. It isn't long before we agree to give it another try and we end up back together, despite my reprehensible behavior at her wedding. Skip ahead 8 years to now. We've been married for almost 6 years, we're very happy and we have an adorable 4-year-old daughter. The night before Trish and I got married, instead of a huge bachelor blowout like her first wedding, she stayed with a friend and I spent the evening alone in my apartment playing my 2 favorite video games, Resident Evil 4 and Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, before going to bed at a reasonable hour. And yes, before you ask, her sister was her maid of honor at our wedding. It should have been awkward, but everyone had a great time. In short, dated girl, broke up, agreed to walk her down the aisle at her wedding, got drunk, did the deed with a working girl's mouth, tasered a guy, did the deed with her sister, but there was a very happy, if bizarre, ending to the whole saga, and that's where my life is now. Whoa, what an epic saga! Sounds like you guys both ended up with who you were meant to be with, regardless of the rocks that you hit getting there. Speaks volumes of how comfortable and accepting of each other you are that these other factors weren't lasting problems going forward, and that you had a long, happy marriage and a kid. And now, our final mega story for the night. Well, I have one, and boy is it a doozy. My friends kidnapped me for my bachelor party. We got in a car and drove down the coast to San Diego. Stopped along the way for seafood, listened to Bon Jovi and Scorpions all the way down, and had a frickin' blast. We got to the Hard Rock, of course, and immediately started drinking. I probably had half a bottle of rum before we even left the room. We went down to the pool, and my buddy yelled out, "Here's the Bachelor!" And that was it. Everyone was buying me shots. Literally, they had Jell-O shots in syringes that they plunged right into your mouth. I remember doing about 6 shots, in addition to the margarita in my hand, because mixing booze is totally a good idea, right? And then I got in the hot tub. Then I remember I couldn't find my friends. And a girl was taking me back to the elevators. And then my friends were in the room too, and I was completely undressed. Frick. The realization of what had just happened sobered me right the frick up, and I completely freaked out. I was jumping up and down in the room, completely undressed, limp manhood flopping around like a dying fish, screaming at my friends that they just let me cheat on my fiancé, and this was all their fault. They would not stop laughing. Apparently, what actually happened is that I got really drunk and started to pass out in the hot tub, so my friends escorted me back to the room to sleep it off. The girl I remember was one of my buddies who'd secured a wig during his partying and thought it was hilarious. They then showed me the wig. It was totally one of those blue and yellow Chargers wigs they wear at the football games. And the more I thought about it, it was absolutely the hair of the girl that I'd followed back to the room. Thank God. After leaving me in the room, they'd all gone back to the party to let me sleep it off, and I'd been in the room for about 3 hours, sound asleep. Somewhere after they left the room, I decided to take off all of my clothes, which is why I was completely undressed. They also showed me the several photos they took of them standing behind my exposed butt, giving thumbs up and making other obscene gestures. I'm going to be completely honest here. These are a good bunch of guys who are also jerks of the finest caliber. Much relieved, we decided it was best if we all just got dressed for dinner. It's important to note that, at this particular instant, everyone in the room, myself included, believed that I'd merely slept during the 3-hour interlude whilst I was in the room, and my friends were at the pool party. This, as we soon learned, was not the case. In preparation for the pool party earlier that day, we'd all changed out of our normal street clothes and into pool attire in the room. Among the many items left in the room as a result of the changing process were my friend's $400 pair of fine leather boots, Boots which, at that precise moment that we all decided to get dressed, were on the floor next to my bed. I put on my pants, my best man put on his shirt, another groomsman put on his suit, and our last friend stuck his foot into the first boot and discovered that it was full of the contents of someone's stomach, presumably chucked into there at great velocity as a result of too much alcohol. I believe he screamed, "What the ever-loving F," as he kicked the boot off his foot as hard as he could. Please, dear listener, take a moment to imagine how one physically kicks a boot off of one's foot. Does it shoot straight off in a lovely arc whereby any liquid, however unlikely, that might be inside of it would remain in the boot? Or does it in fact spin like a helicopter's stabilizing rotor, end over end, spraying vomitous goo upon the floor, beds, ceiling, and of course the person who kicked off said boot? Spoiler alert, it's the latter. The rest of the story is all downhill. I was spared purchasing a new pair of boots for my friend, the other boot was also full, but I did have to clean the entire room. A task for which I somehow felt that a pile of bar coasters was an adequate tool. My friend changed out of his chuck-covered pants, showered again, and put on his jeans with his shirt and sports coat, which were miraculously unfouled. We all went out for dinner, which I was not okay to eat given the state of my stomach, and I went back to the room and slept until morning, at which point much ceremony was made of everyone checking their shoes to see if I'd chucked up again. I had not. I do regret that I missed what was, by all accounts, a great party, but I'm glad that I had what I consider to be a true bachelor party experience. Namely, I had a party so absurd that it removed from me, for quite some time, the urge to party, or even the smell of alcohol again, thereby keeping me at home with my wife and happily within the confines of my marriage bed, a sanctity which I have never, to this day, violated. I really wish I'd been awake enough to go to that exotic dance club, though. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.